We're gonna roll. We got one counselor that's stuck in traffic, and there's one that's coming down Route 9 as we speak. So we're gonna get started as soon as Twyla is ready for us.
You can begin. We're going to do the roll call.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's do that. And you want to wave the pledge to the flag?
Please.
Okay. Councillor Albert?
He's en route.
En route. Councillor Colby? Here. Councillor Crawford?
Here.
Councillor Lunt?
En route.
All right. Councillor Ward?
Here.
Councillor Crafts?
Here.
And Councillor Brunel?
Here.
Thank you, Twyla.
You're welcome. Next item, dispatch discussion.
Can we start this discussion? I think, how do calls actually come in to dispatch now and take it from there? I hear criticism, if you will, often enough about our current dispatchers' level of training to be able to address it. So I'd like to target that one discussion before we actually move forward. So how do calls come into Lisbon Dispatch at present?
Sheriff, do you want to explain what happens with the 911 and then I'll drop to the regular?
Please. Thank you, Eric.
Sure. Currently, we operate your PSAP, so any 911 calls made from Lisbon residents come into our center. We take the call and then transfer the call and the information to your dispatch, whether it would be police, fire, or rescue, and you are Durham as well, right?
Yes.
And the same happens with Durham, who contracts for dispatching services with you. So the initial 911 call comes to us. We handle it like we handle every other 911 call. Once we get our information, which is usually the contact information, nature of the call, we transfer the call to your dispatch center where we exchange information, make sure we don't lose the call, and at that time, it's in Lisbon's hands.
Okay.
So then from that point, our communications officers would dispatch rescue if that were the case, or officers, and actually our officers respond to the rescue calls as well.
Okay.
If it's a call that's a regular line, comes in on our 353-2500 line, then our communications officers take the call and dispatch whatever services are required.
Is there a call, Sheriff, that actually would stay at county dispatch to be handled before it actually gets moved to Lisbon? It's my understanding. There's a term for it. I forget what it actually is.
If you don't mind, I brought, because of the conversation, and I didn't know tonight what your level of interest was when you asked me to come speak to the selectmen. So I asked my communications director, Mike Fournier, to come with me, and also the county administrator's here in case you have any questions for him. If you wouldn't mind him talking about the technical aspects of how it operates, I wouldn't mind.
No, that would be great, because in that regard, we're looking for tonight. Anything else anybody's ever talked to me is the fact is I would call it a bipolar conversation about a lot of different subjects. So that is my goal for tonight.
Mike Fournier, your title?
Martin Fournier,
Oh, Martin.
Communications Director.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ward, I missed the first few words of your question.
Is there a call that would actually start with county dispatch that would not actually make its way to Lisbon, or are all calls pushed to Lisbon?
If we receive a 911 call, whether that be from a motorist driving through your town calling on 911 on a cell phone, or one of your local residents calling 911, it's going to come to our PSAP.
Yep.
We then, in turn, will take the nature of the call, like the sheriff articulated before, and those should all be pushed to your agency. In the event of like a serious accident or a serious crime in progress, we would hold on to the call, conference your dispatch center in with that call, and be able to start mutual aid if necessary, whether it be like a structure fire or we had a stabbing not too long ago, local in the town. Our dispatchers held on to that call and were able to conference you guys in as well. So, but 99.9% of the time, we push those calls right over to you.
Okay.
I think what Councilor Ward is referring to maybe is the EMD calls.
Yes. So with EMD process, there's an
Educate me. EMD is an acronym for what?
I'm sorry, I got a little.
Warn them that'll be coming with fire.
The state of Maine implemented, through the Emergency Services Communication Bureau, they implemented a internationally set standard of protocols when it comes to medical dispatching. Okay, and this isn't national now; it's international now. There's, I forget the amount, but it's over 100 countries in the world that have adopted this standardized set of protocols. And what it is basically the dispatcher has the ability to intervene prior to dispatch being, first responders being sent out. And what that does is it cuts down on the amount of time that it takes to get emergency life-saving measures to the patient. So our dispatchers are not only trained in CPR themselves, but they have a standardized set of protocols that they read from, and it's internationally recognized as if we stay on course, on script, that patient will stand a better chance of survival. And it's everything from abdominal pain to childbirth to CPR. I mean, it covers almost all medical situations that you can imagine. With that being said, the state of Maine saw the benefit in that, and they've since adopted emergency fire dispatch protocols. So that covers everything from car crashes to a chicken coop is on fire to forgive me, I'm going to mess up this. The Lower Umbro Mill is on fire again.
You did fine.
I did fine. Thank you. But I mean, it has contingencies for hazmat incidents, car crashes, electric vehicles, and now a problem for firefighters and first responders. They have to be aware of that. So the emergency fighter protocols takes that into consideration, so we don't send a first responder into a situation that could get them in trouble.
Okay.
So all of my dispatchers are EMD certified. In September, all of my dispatchers are actually going to EFD, Emergency Fire Dispatch Protocol. They don't have a choice; it's mandatory, and we're moving forward.
Are dispatchers EMD certified, Chief?
No, sir. All of our dispatchers have been to the 40-hour course that it's called ETC training, which is Emergency Telecommunicators course.
Okay.
And that's 40 hours that all new communications officers go to, and that's no matter where in the state they're hired. So that's the level that ours stop at.
So if I'm hearing the way the calls come in, get routed to Lisbon, the only exposure on this would be anybody that's still using the 353-2500, and how do those get addressed?
Well, I guess if it's a non-emergency call, then our communication...
Business as usual?
Business
Exactly.
as usual, yes, sir.
Right.
If it's a emergency call that comes in on those lines, then the communication officer will immediately dispatch rescue, fire along those lines, and they will also try to transfer the call if it's something that needs EMD or emergency medical dispatch. They'll try to transfer it to ASO without losing the call.
Okay, so we're working the mutual aid that we talked about originally for that call started at county, plus getting dispatched to the scene as quickly as possible.
Yes, sir.
Sheriff?
To know, not that it affects you currently, or nor would it in the future, because we take the 911 calls.
Yep.
But the EMD he was talking to, and whatever the fire encompasses, once that comes into play, we're anticipating, I think it was October? September is like our start date for it. There's also a QA, quality assurance, that goes along with that. It involves a lot of time because we're actually auditing our calls to make sure we're handling them right. Like I said, it won't affect you here, but that's all part of this international program. The other issue is last year, not in Lisbon specifically, but I think in another nearby municipality, there was an issue about advertising emergency calls, like you mentioned, the 353-2500 number.
Yep.
I believe there was legislation passed prohibiting what you could advertise to call in case of emergency, as a side note. But in some regard, I think everybody is aware you're always better off calling 911 when there's an emergency anyway. So just things to keep in mind as we go.
Right. Yes, sir.
Along this line, only EMD personnel can go through these protocols that they're talking about. At the end of the protocol, there is an emergency medical code that is determined, and that code is passed on to the EMTs when the call is transferred.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
So our dispatchers are not qualified to determine the emergency medical code in any situation. Only the EMD qualified people
Mhm.
can issue that code. And that code is critical to the EMTs to determine what they need to respond to that emergency.
Correct, and if I'm to recap the conversation we just had, is the fact is the calls originate to county, they're pushed to us. If they're EMD related, they actually are fielded before they are directed to us. The only exposure would be if anybody is actually going the 353-2500 and we're getting somebody out locally for dispatch, and if they're also going through that script, they're reaching out for the mutual aid to cover the EMD.
And if they need mutual aid, they go back to county, correct?
Right. And I just want to make sure we're clear on that before we move forward.
So my question is, if the call were to be dropped, if they went out for an EMD?
If they were EMDing the call,
Yeah, and if somebody called the 35300, the 2500 number,
Yep.
and they needed mutual aid, and they called for the EMD, and it dropped.
no, if you call 353-2500,
Yeah,
you're not a 911 center, so
Right.
you don't even have.
but I'm saying, say
I
somebody's,
don't want to speak for you, but
No.
EMDing is something we do as part of the PSAP.
right, but what I'm saying is, say it's like a critical emergency, and our guys are not able to handle that call, so they'd contact you guys. You said that we would try to transfer it back to you guys without dropping a call, correct?
If they need a mutual aid.
Right.
Yeah, or if it's, let's say, a heart attack, something that
Right.
we need to, start the EMD process while we get a rescue.
Right, but,
transfer.
so what my question is if we can't get to county, or the call gets dropped, or whatever happens, what do we do in that instance?
We have rescue or.
Already en route.
So if it goes through the 911,
You're assured to get EMD service. On the scenario you're talking about, there's two issues. If somebody calls your 353-2500 number and tries to transfer the call to us to EMD, it's not going to come through our 911 line, it's going to come through our business line. So you run the risk of
Right.
not being a priority call. If, in fact, and again, my perception would be if I call 353-2500 for a medical issue, the dispatcher is going to dispatch a medical responder, but might lose the opportunity for a dispatcher to instruct them how to begin CPR, how to check for meds, how to go through any number of questions that might help the responders or actually the individuals provide some sort of care before they arrive. If
Okay.
that helps you out.
yeah, that's what I was pretty much asking.
Yeah, you lose some other features. With 911, if you ever come to our center, and I don't know if you have it here, but if you call 911, it'll show up on a map where you're calling from.
So, but if the call went through 911, you would be able to triage it to our EMT guys to let them know what's going on. If it doesn't go through 911 and it goes through 353-2500, we're not able to do that. So then do they have to triage when they get there on scene?
Triage as in determine what the
What's
situation
going on, what protocols
they'll-
need to be taken, whereas if it went through 911, that would already be situated, they could
Yeah.
instantly get to work.
Well, you would hope it would be, you're dealing with standardized cards that, are supportive and probably tested. There's a reason they're doing, but I can't say any system is fail-safe. I mean, we're giving you information based on questions you answer that are leading us down this flip chart of recommendations, and from what you're saying as a caller to what we're hearing as a dispatcher, we're relaying the information to rescue personnel. There could be, is she turning blue? No, when actually he is. It changes things a little bit. But for the most part, I'd say it's better going with some information or maybe a predetermined situation than having nothing
Going in
available
blind.
to you.
Okay.
thank you both for just clarifying the way things currently come through now to actually set the framework associated with the discussion. That said, I put a communication together yesterday about what the current comm center actually do. I shared it with the department heads and the council associated with that, just as a good starting point. I'd like to speak with that, and that said, Chief, I'm going to turn it to you to give your perspective, what your feelings are on the topic, and I'd like to hear from all of our business partners on this, meaning the fire, PW, go right through our shopping list, the people that are covered by our current comm center to get their flavor for it.
Okay. Well, what I should start with here is we're talking about more than just simply who answers your phones, when we're talking about this. And I actually, before I talk about that, I feel the need to remind everybody that we're also talking about people here. I have 4 full-time communications officers and 5 reserve communications officers that are coming in. And I know this is my first time going through this process, but apparently the process has been vetted by all the paperwork I've been reading for the last couple of weeks several times, 3 times.
4 times since 2009.
Okay, 4 times. And I just want to remind everybody that while we are talking numbers and some functions here, that every time this comes up, I've got personnel that get,
Right.
It affects their personal lives, their families' lives, and the stress level goes up. So, again, I'm just asking that we keep in mind that this is about more than just money.
Right, and that's anything that's come from this seated council's discussion is it is not always a dollars and cents discussion. It needs to what are our options? What are our opportunities? What are our problems? I'll use the example associated with that. One of the direct actions that actually fell out from the last effort associated with that is we lost 4 business partners associated with that, and that actually caused a revenue stream hold associated with that. I don't want to put somebody that's actually still one of our partners in a lurch to be able to have it fall out the way that it did the last time around. I don't believe it was the intent, it's just the way that it actually worked itself out. So yes, it is not always about dollars and cents.
In researching this, obviously I'm new to the game. A lot of people here have talked about this a lot. So I've reached out to several police chiefs that I know, 2 of whom are still in Androscoggin County and 2 that are outside of Androscoggin County but have been through this process. The reason I did this was because to me it's important that the council and anybody that's involved in this decision know the good and the bad of this process of potentially, going to another agency. And to be honest with you, from everybody I've spoken to, there are positive and negative aspects that I think you should all know. One of the positive aspects, if we were to go to ASO, is greater database. Right now, the Lisbon Police Department is the only law enforcement agency in Androscoggin County that isn't in the IMC, the combined IMC, which is, for IMC is our software. So right now, if a Lisbon officer stops somebody on the street and we check to see if we've dealt with them before, we're getting if Lisbon PD has dealt with them before. If we were to go to Androscoggin County, and then we would be on their IMC process. So it's just a greater database. So if we stop somebody on Lisbon Street and we were through ASO, one of the positives would be that we would literally see every contact that an officer in Androscoggin County has had with that person. So it's just more information, and information is very important to us. Another, what could be considered a positive for us, or I would consider a positive, is for Lisbon PD, it'd be less in-house IT manpower requirements. So if we were to go to Androscoggin County, they would be taking care of all the upkeep with the IMC software, which would free up Sergeant Moore from his IT duties and would give him greater time for supervision and management out on the road. So that's another positive. And faster prisoner processing time. Right now, if we bring a prisoner to Androscoggin County, it takes a little longer because our IMC, Lisbon's IMC process and Androscoggin County's don't talk to each other. So it just takes us longer to process a prisoner. So that would be more efficient if we were with ANDSO. And one other positive that I've repeatedly heard from other chiefs that I've been speaking to is in reference to extra staffing during emergency situations. for those that aren't aware, in Lisbon, we always have one communications officer on duty, and on Friday and Saturday nights, we'll have a second reserve officer come in, and Sunday during the day, we have a reserve officer come in. But, so basically, Friday and Saturday nights, we'll have two officers in working the phones. But other than that, it's one person by themselves. And if, you never know when an emergency is going to happen, obviously, whether it's a high-speed chase, a fire, some type of emergency. The positive that I've heard from other chiefs is the fact that you have multiple people there if something happens, because when something happens, whether it's a bad crash, a chase, a fire, you get numerous calls coming into your establishment. So the fact that NDSO has at least two, if not three, at sometimes working is a positive that I've heard from other agencies. Now there's also the negative. We have a loss of control, and I've heard the same complaint from several other chiefs, and it would be obvious we'd have a loss of local control as far as, the daily aspects right now in Lisbon emergency in our dispatch center. If we have an issue in dispatch, we address it locally. If we want to add, let's say, a different call for service to our IMC program, if I want to have better track of our use of force, whenever we use force in Lisbon, I'm able to talk to Sergeant Moore and we can add a field, so it makes it easier for us to track. We would obviously, Androscoggin County and the sheriff have said if we wanted to add a service like that, add a call for service, that's something we can do. We just have to go through them. But just so everybody knows, that's one of the processes that we would follow. Another negative could be a potential administration change. The two police chiefs that I spoke to in Androscoggin County have done nothing but rave about the sheriff and his administration and how they have handled the whole communications process. They said it wasn't that great before, but with this administration, it's like night and day, and they've got nothing negative to say. So, that's wonderful, and it would be great, I'm sure, if we went over there. But I also need to say the other aspect of it, which is, even though I'm sure the sheriff doesn't plan on being deposed anytime soon, if he were to get voted out of office, it could be another administration coming in, and it could be a new administration that maybe isn't as big on the communications aspect of the service. And we could go back and revert to what apparently it was with the previous administration. Just something to keep in mind. And the obvious here that I've heard anybody that's wanted to speak to me about this so far is the loss of face-to-face contact. That people, and there's no doubt about it, there would be a loss of face-to-face contact if we were to switch over to Androscoggin County. Again, like I started out saying, this is about more than just who answers the phone. There's a number of other complaints and issues that we deal with here in dispatch, from people that walk in. Right now, we have 24/7 service, so if anybody needs to see us, no matter what time of day or night, they can come in to our dispatch center and meet with a live person. I'll be honest with you, if we were to switch to Androscoggin County for dispatch services, my recommendation would be that we would have somebody in the dispatch center during the day, but after a certain hour, whether it's 4, 5, 6 p.m., that we would switch to basically what they call direct line phone and a camera system that would go to Androscoggin County, so that if somebody came in after hours, they could pick up the phone and speak to a communications officer in Androscoggin. This is the generally accepted way that all other agencies that I know of in the state of Maine have gone when they've cut their dispatch services. So other than walking complaints, our communications officers are monitoring the police, fire, public works, school department radios. They control access in and out of town hall. We have cameras all around the building here, and they are able to, from our dispatch center, control access. We monitor children swaps. As we all know, there are some people that just don't get along, even though they've had children, and they can come into the police dispatch center right now to have those swaps that go on. So that's another service that we offer. Our communications officers monitor the booking process when we bring a prisoner in. Although it's in the back of the building, we have the camera system set up so they can monitor. And if we have an officer working alone, it's possible they could be in there. And if we were with Androscoggin County, we wouldn't have that camera system set up for Androscoggin County to monitor that. And, they notarize legal documents 24/7 when we make arrests, or if people need to come in and have something notarized, we now have the personnel that are around to do that. So those are just some of the services that we would lose, and those are some of the positives and negatives. And again, I just want to make sure that everybody here is making an informed decision when we start talking about this. I think at the end of the day, I know that you have numerous people you want to talk to, but this is going to come down to what is the level of service that the town of Lisbon and its residents expect from their police departments. There will be a money savings. You know, I've seen enough numbers to know that there's a definite money savings here, but it's going to come down to services and what are the expectations of our community.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Sure.
Don't we have a supervisor on duty 24/7?
No, sir. We have a supervisor that will be in, during the daytime hours. I'm in, as well as the detective sergeant. And then we have patrol supervisors that come in at either 2 or 3 in the afternoon that will work till 2 or 3 in the morning. But basically from 2 or 3 in the morning until 7:30, when myself or the other detective sergeant come in, we don't have a supervisor on.
Chair, are you going to leave this open for discussion through the public for the rest of the meeting? Or you
If anybody has a question while the chief's sitting in the truck, by all means, I would actually like to do just that.
Chief, may I ask a question? So right now,
Please.
we actually have hours throughout the night where we actually have one police officer on duty.
Yes, sir.
As of right now, if we actually bring in an arrest, it's very possible that could be handled in-house and actually kept that officer in town. If this was to happen, there'd be a number of hours throughout the night from what I'm hearing, that if he was to actually make a choice, either make the arrest and transfer it in county and leave the town without any service, or we would have to regroup and actually, which would benefit everybody, actually have 2 officers on duty all the time, which would be a deficit or a change in money savings. Is that somewhat realistic? Or?
Yeah, to be honest with you, if we didn't have a communications officer in the communications center in the middle of the night, I would recommend that if we had an arrest, we brought them straight to Androscoggin County, just for pure safety issues.
And that would leave the town without a police officer,
Yes, sir.
or however long it would take.
Yes, sir.
That, just want to make sure that that level of service that we are aware of. But the only really fix to that would be the idea of actually having all times at least have 2 police officers on duty, which would be a change of schedule, right?
Yeah, to be honest with you, right now, we could not manage to have 2 officers on duty at all times.
It would actually be an increase to the budget and staff to actually be able to maintain that.
To maintain 2 officers working at all times, yes.
Is that where the constraint comes, Chief, or is the fact is not having somebody available to be able to get with other competing agencies for that, to fill that shift? Is it just the bound by our budget, or getting somebody physically in?
Yeah, currently, just with the manpower that we have, we don't have the manpower to keep 2 officers on 24/7. Trust me, I would much prefer to be able to do that, just
Right.
for obvious safety issues. But right now, we don't have the budget to hire the extra manpower to do that.
Even if we had the budget, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
If we did go to county, would some of that savings, would you be able to work that out? Would that be enough savings to be able to always ensure there's 2 people on? I know it's just preliminary numbers here, but.
Yeah, these are preliminary numbers, but yes, we could, I would say that would be just about enough to have a second body. I believe, I'm looking at the town manager, I think that would be,
Yeah, the initial
Yes.
1-year savings
Yep.
would be enough to hire 1 person.
yes.
That actually bookends nicely with my question. So even if we did go that route and we do have enough savings to do it, the reality is right now we're having trouble filling spots. Isn't that correct? I think from our last meeting, I heard that this is an ongoing problem plaguing all of the state of Maine right now, getting qualified candidates.
It is plaguing the state. We haven't gone to ad yet, so I don't know if we're going to have the same issue. I'd probably be foolish to think we're not going to be like everybody else and have some issues.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, I'd even go one step further, and I appreciate the information associated with the dollars for it. it's here in the room tonight, not to actually be the priority, but to actually be part of the discussion, but I'm hearing it to say that this would actually be position neutral. We're going to have a loss of service and actually no cost savings. Yes, I see the hand, Larry. If anybody would actually like a copy of the numbers we're looking at, please share.
Top one, I got notes on.
Those are on.
Thank you.
Yes, please, mister.
No,
No, I've seen Mr. Fellows behind you, sir.
Can you elaborate on what you just said? Can you say that again?
I'm looking at, and I don't want it to actually detour too much, but in that regard, the first-year cost savings, if we add an administrative person during the daytime hours and you actually add staffing through the overnight, anything associated with savings disappears from that front page. The fact is, in that regard, you'd be picking it up either in the nature of an additional member to fill the void on the night patrol plus the administrative office during the day, at a minimum. Back to Mr. Fellows.
The question for the chief was, Megan, you were in Brunswick when Freeport consolidated with Brunswick on the dispatch.
Yes, sir.
Can you relate any experiences, positive or negative, that were there?
There was a lot of concern in Freeport, as there is that I've heard repeatedly from people in town here, about loss of local control. A big concern in Freeport was that Brunswick communications officers would not know local landmarks in Freeport. To be honest with you, when I called the other chiefs and spoke to them about consolidation, they've all said the same complaint, that everybody was worried there would be a loss of knowledge, local knowledge. To be honest with you, that has not proven to be the case. It wasn't the case in Brunswick when I was there with Freeport calls, and it hasn't been with the other chiefs of police that I've spoken to. Other than that, in Brunswick, we took on the Freeport communications officers. Some stayed with Brunswick. Some were not able to handle that level of service and did leave. There were hard feelings. There were constant complaints of we're not getting the same level of service. It was more. There was little that we could show there was an actual loss of service other than, again, at night, the loss of face-to-face contact if people want to go. Freeport also has the drop-down system with a phone, with a camera, so anybody goes in after hours would pick up the phone, and Brunswick dispatchers could see them in Freeport and then dispatch somebody to the station. So that was the only big, that was the biggest issue, I guess, was, again, it came down to a loss of control and fear of local landmarks being lost.
We also have had a similar experience as what you're looking at here. And again, I'm not here to make a sales pitch. You guys asked to meet just the facts.
Right.
But just to let you know, Livermore Falls PD, they used to have a dispatch center. I think 2006 is when they consolidated with us. I don't know if you know the proximity from Livermore Falls to the. That's, I think, gone fine. There hasn't been any issues. The notary aspect, all our dispatchers as well, ironically notarized. There must be something to that with that market, and are made available. Our frequency, as far as visits from other PDs for people we dispatch to that didn't have a dispatch center like you do or like Livermore Falls did have, is like Mechanic Falls. And when you look at the travel rates, as far as when we were talking about booking processes, the time we save. When the whole records management system was brought into place in Androscoggin County with the jail and all the departments combined, the idea was, just in fact your concern, putting officers on the street quicker. You bring them to the jail, you turn in your arrest info, they get patted down, and you're back out on the road. You come to do, and a lot of things are backfilled into your information. So there's pros and cons either way, and I'm not here. I just did want to point that out. Right. And in defense of our agency, not that anybody discredited it, but one thing we've tried to do with our new initiatives towards communications is we've started a user group to encourage participation from all of our users because we want the feedback. I think it's a little different with police departments because when there's an issue, police chiefs send a call right away. With rescue and fire, it's something that comes up with the users group, and it's good because it helps us to deliver services consistently. But we're doing as much as we can on that issue or that concern to encourage participation from our users, just so you know. But everything you said, I think, is just in line, other than maybe you're tying up a guy here with a prisoner rather than the travel time to and from the jail. Thanks.
A couple of key points. I appreciate you actually speaking on that, Sheriff. The comment that this chief made associated with loss of control, one of the other pieces in potential admin changes. One of the other ones that I would add to that, wearing the budget committee hat, I was a little troubled to actually see the level of scrutiny that your budget actually gets at the county level when they're actually getting granular to actually talk about PCs and those kinds of things. I know it's ill blood that keeps, yeah, it's like, wow, it's like we really want to go there, and the fact is associated with that, I know there's a lot of ill will that's still being spread out with some of that cast of characters to actually say. One soundbite from that to relate it back to here tonight is the fact that you were in a position to actually talk about loss of revenue stream for the way that we actually asked you to come to this last meeting, when the way that those things played themselves out. It's all tied to the fact that I'm reluctant to share anything associated with cost savings, because it puts you in an awkward position again twice in 2 years to actually be invited to hear and then be demonized for the information that's actually presented. I think it's doing you a disservice as well, primarily because the fact is it's not a dollars and cents discussion. Anything that's come out of this to date in any of the dialogues or even tonight, it's the fact is it's a loss of service. So.
Well, I think that's what we're trying to figure out.
No, I agree.
What services?
What level of? Absolutely. And I just, the sheriff's here as part of that partnership associated with that, so I appreciate the effort coming from the county too. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name's Martin Campbell, and I don't know why we keep bringing this up in town. You said this has been going on since 2009. We've done it 4 times. Here we are again. I think most of the town people like it the way it is. We like our dispatch center. They're doing a good job. We know if we call 353-2500, and that's what I call if I have a problem. I don't call 911 because I know I'm going to be calling out of town and relay the message back here. I don't think our system's broke, so why are we trying to change it? The town people don't want to change. They like it the way it is. You know, you got figures here, well, we're going to save some money, but I believe in the big picture, we're not going to save any money. The people like them here. They have a problem, they can call. They know the town. The officers know the town. It's just, I don't know why we keep bringing this up. I was asked to come tonight. I wasn't planning on speaking. I run a record service here in town. Yep. I've lived here my whole life, and it's not broke. Leave it alone. Go on to something else, something that's, that the town needs. I think we're all set with what we have.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I see you right here. Go ahead.
Well, in the 13 years I've been here in town, I have been on the receipt of some of the services of both the ambulance and the police department. There was one instance when I came home to find out I had been burgled. 5 minutes later, 3 police officers showed up. We knew who the miscreant was. They went upstairs, nicked him. 15 minutes later, he was off to jail, and 5 years later, he got out of prison. And everybody knew everyone. The officers knew who the miscreant was, and they had a pretty good idea of what was going on. He stole 2 firearms, which, needless to say, is not something you want to have happen. Response. Speed of response. There was one time I almost died of pancreatitis, and thanks to the ambulance service, I got a quick ride to hospital with trained EMTs. And I'm still here to be a pain in the butt to all of you. So, my concern would be, if you got a dispatcher that does not know the town, does not know the people in the town, generally speaking, if I call in the dispatch, most of the dispatchers know my voice and my name, and they know I'm not giving them a bunch of pooey. It's a legitimate call. And they also know people in town who, well, maybe they're not sober, who knows. But it's a situation of we're a community, we're 9,000 people, we have a system that works and works well. We've got one of the finest police departments in the state, and as Mr. Campbell says, don't screw with it.
Yes, Larry.
We established the comm center years ago when technology had not caught up with us. Now technology has advanced so much and so fast that we're talking about saving people's lives. And this is a point that's been missed. Chief talked about his dispatchers. I remember when his dispatchers were offered jobs and they didn't take it. Okay? But here's my point. We now have technology that says when a 911 call is received at a PSAP, whichever one you guys go with, whatever, that operator is qualified to gather medical information to save lives. Okay? Now, that dispatcher, that operator should be able to dispatch our first responders. As far as her point about not knowing the area and all this and that doesn't mean nothing, because they're dispatching our first responders, and our first responders know where people are. Now, I understand Mr. Campbell's point, and I think that's fine. I'm worried about several things. The first one is saving lives. Everybody knows in an emergency, time is critical. Medical information is critical. The faster we can get the EMTs with the knowledge of what's going on, the better chance a patient has of surviving. And that should be our main concern. Now, yes, doing it right might even save us some money, but I'm not saying it. The critical point here is we should be looking at everything we can do to save lives and not put our people at risk. And I don't care where you go, if we get the operators who take the call, dispatching first responders, so we get the fastest response time to help save lives, I'm for that. Okay? I'm for that. Now, I know everybody knows everybody, good old boy system. That don't help that patient in that emergency. Okay? But getting an EMT to them, okay, is critical. And if we can reduce the time it takes to get them out. Now, I visited Androscoggin County Dispatch, and I sat down with two of their dispatchers, because they always have two on duty. And I said to them, what is your main problem with Lisbon? And you know what the response was? On numerous occasions, we have not been able to get a hold of the Lisbon Communication Center with 353-2500. Okay? So there was a delay. How long? Who knows? But their concern was when they tried to get a hold of the comm center with 353-2500, it was busy. And they couldn't get through. So what good does that do a patient? Thank you.
Chair, may I just ask the comm center how often they actually call 353-2500 to Lisbon on emergency type situations? And with Larry's point, I would rather actually hear from our medical professionals that actually use the service if there's a problem, other than a citizen that probably doesn't run EMT or run the fire calls. Fair, right?
Got a quick question for you, if you don't mind, Sheriff.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how many times we've called, if somebody
Yeah.
asked that. But anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Something that might be a little bit more, I guess, something that you probably quantify on a regular and consistent basis. Average speed of answer, how quickly your.
Well, I can tell you
dispatch
from
can
sitting on your end, I
Yeah.
can't tell you ours because I haven't actually looked at it, although I'm sure we can pull the numbers.
Right.
I was on the Auburn City Council for 3 terms, and year after year I'd hear Chief Wayne Wirtz talk about seamless 911.
Right.
And average response times of 8 minutes. Now, we're rural patrol, we deal with, Durham and Wales, and you're dealing with a lot of volunteers.
Right.
So that's a little longer. I can tell you I'd have to agree with the individual on his point about if obviously we're getting the 911 call and dispatching, it's going to be a quicker transaction than it would be getting the 911 call. It will never be seamless because we're dealing with we're a regional center, but it does, that our setup would allow you to save some time on those call transfers.
And that's the thing I guess I want to quantify. We could talk about it, but I'd actually like to see the numbers. And what I guess you've had other folks come into your center, so they must have, one would like to think they kept records of what their speed of response was.
We
And
can
do we
pull
see
any-
do we see an increase? Do we see a decrease?
It's definitely going to be faster because we have multiple dispatchers working. So the ability for task is to basically multiply.
Sure.
One person is EMD in the call while the partner is starting the rescue trucks, starting the fire trucks, starting the police. Another aspect of that is we're doing your dispatching and your officers in our jail. We know that. And our other law enforcement officers that are on on the roads know that as well. We can automatically reroute them to cover your town if you were short-staffed. I think you asked about speed of response. The
Yes.
state says my 911 answer time is 0.6 seconds.
Excellent. And so this is what I'm talking about. Quantifiable. This is the kind of stuff, as you can see, there are a lot of folks in a lot of different camps. And I think we visited this a bunch of times. And to answer Mr. Campbell, we're not visiting this because it's something he said, hey, let's drag this out and see how this goes, kick it around, see what happens. It's because there's been a request to go back and actually look at it. The last time this came up, it was pretty volatile. It was very quick. And there wasn't a whole lot of discussion until there was a vote on the table, and then people came out in droves. And I'm glad they did. So I think what we're trying to do this time around is one and done. Look at this thing, be honest about it, be clear, and try to listen to the majority of the folks in the town, but also get real information to kind of quantify it. So to go back to your point, and I hear what you're saying, and thank you for chiming in, I think I want to see numbers. I think that's really what it comes down for me. I want to know that, and I'll use Sabatis because they're the ones that I know off the top of my head. When Sabatis was when they were doing dispatching with us, I'd like to understand what we knew for an average speed of answer and what that looked like when they went to you guys. And I'm just trying to understand.
Well, no, here's something you need to, if you think about it like this, we're getting the 911 call, we're taking the information, and then we're transferring it to your dispatch before, so that's going to create a lag that you lose automatically.
Right.
Currently, with 2 people on, I used to work nights when I was on the road. I liked it better. I would come into dispatch center to get the stuff notarized. Anyway, there'd be a 911 call coming in while one's taking information, the other's listening in, he's actually starting to dispatch. If it's, so there's little things like that, depending, we're going to have 3 on shortly. We've added staff. We're in a whole middle of a renovation project. So that'll help us out because our call volume is higher, probably like yours is, from 2 in the afternoon till like 9 o'clock at night. So there's little things like that, but we can actually, if you want to send an itemized list, we could get that from our records manager or just from looking at the calls. I know Sabatis, one comment that was said to me when they left us and then came back is the backup issue for the law enforcement guys on the road. And that's not as relate to dispatch or what you're doing for dispatch. That's because when our guys are on the road, they can see where you're at, and we're monitoring your stations more frequently. They actually put in our scan on our radio. So if I hear the guy, let's say from Livermore Falls, is coming down with a prisoner, I know in an emergency call we're getting it. Non-emergency call, you can kind of hold it. There's a difference for law enforcement purposes. Well, with Sabatis, it was that same thing. As a matter of fact, some of our cruisers, when they switched over, we couldn't even hear the traffic with Sabattis and Lisbon anymore. Where prior to that Sabattis coming over, I listened to Lisbon as much as I listened to Sabattis as Sabattis was. I don't know what happened. It was probably a programming issue on our end. But it was little things like that. Our guys on the road are aware when the Mechanic Falls officer is away or our Poland officer is busy something. So you try to gravitate towards those areas where that's something that just happens naturally through the, I guess, profession and experience.
Thank you very much.
Yep, I see a hand.
Hey, Harry Moore.
Thank you, Harry.
I think we can get lost in the weeds in this real quick. Again, if we start parsing out the county, when they do their 911 transfers, it hits Lisbon actually through software automatically. So the same time that 911 call comes into the county, it's actually hitting Lisbon's switch. They call us and say we got a 911. We hit our 911 button on our screen. It backfills all the information from that call. So that's coming in simultaneously with us as well as the PSAT. The other thing is, Mr. Fillmore's brought up the EMD codes. EMD codes, if Jim asked the comm center to get him the EMD codes because they charge more for billing if they have the EMD code. That was the reason behind it, not, I don't think, because it changes how they respond to it. But there's a lot of things and a lot of factors. The county, if they have two people working, if you make a 911 call, one person has to EMD that call. The other one's the one making the phone call to us, not the person doing the EMD. If two calls are at the county, who's going to do the call? I don't know how they do that. Somebody's got to put on hold, right? So you can find scenarios and situations where it works great, and you can find it where it doesn't work great. We had a double fatal in Durham. The dispatcher was familiar with Durham, and he did a damn good job with that double fatal call over in Durham. I think the answer to solve the problem is EMD train our dispatchers. Was it a 1-week school?
Yeah, actually, I didn't tell you this, but I contacted the company. I contacted the company that does EMD training in the state of Maine, and asked them, explained to them the issue that we were going to be talking about this evening, and asked what it would cost the town of Lisbon if we wanted to certify all our officers in emergency medical dispatch. And he said it would be $40,000 to $50,000. Now, what I need to warn everybody about, however, is it's going to be more to us than $40,000 to $50,000 because we have one dispatcher, one communications officer working. Once that person starts doing an EMD, emergency medical dispatch, they're not going to be able to answer any other calls. So you just need to keep that in mind. We could get our people trained up if the concern is public safety. The issue that we'll also have is once they start, if you have somebody suffering a stroke or a heart attack and you're trying to provide EMD services, they're not going to be able to just put them on hold because 2500's ringing. So it is just an issue to keep in mind. We could get that training for our people, but we would really need a second officer when that was occurring to be able to answer the phones.
Hold on. Mr. Robitaille, I saw you nodding right there behind Mr. Moore. Do you have anything on that topic, where he was going with that?
The EMD does make a difference in response. That determines whether or not we go with lights and sirens, the life severity. If they advise us that it's an alpha level call or a bravo level call, we don't go with our lights and sirens. But if they say it's a echo or delta, that's a different story. And that gets us a response also from the fire service in town. So EMD is very validated. Same with the fire side on that. May I ask a question?
Sure.
Does the sheriff's department plan on putting on additional staff if they take over dispatch from the town of Lisbon?
Yeah, this year we added one for second shift. We, from our past experience dealing with Lisbon call volumes and looking at everything, we have told the commissioners, county administrator, we'd be looking at adding 3 additional, which would give us 24-hour coverage, 3 people on the desks, all but, what was it, 2 days? All but 2 days, and those 2 days would be 2 hours. There would just be 2 on staff. We currently, right now, we got 2 24 hours. We have 1 5 days a week, because during the week peak time. But looking at the growth we've had with Sabatis, if Lisbon were to come aboard and possibly Durham, the effect that would have, we know that fire, in effect EMDing, I don't know what you call it, with the quality assurance, that all takes up man hours. In our new center, it's roughly 1,500 square feet. We're putting a room off of our basically call space so they can have an isolated room but still be in earshot to do the quality assurance that's required with that. So yes, we would be I forgot where the question came from, but we would be adding extra staff at that time for a number of reasons that was stated here, plus some of just the back office things that aren't necessarily related to talking to through a microphone or answering a phone.
Yeah, I have a question. If you were going to hire three additional people, would you be willing to give priority to the people that are already working in Lisbon, since they already know the town?
The chief and I have talked about that. There's some things that come into play as far as union contracts, background checks. When we first met with the inquiry, and that was all it was, he was very concerned with having the discussion because of, this is his department we're looking at, and I respect that. But at that time, we'd have to evaluate the applicants. Our union contract does say we're required to hire sufficiently qualified from within. We just posted a dispatch position of which we hired somebody with no experience with the agency, an outsider. She starts March 6th, I think it is. So we would be we're not opposed to doing that. Obviously, we'd have manpower, a need for manpower. Fortunately, over the past year and a half, we haven't had any full-time turnover, which is very rare for the dispatch center, because when I took it over or entered the position of sheriff, it was staffing was a nightmare. So we seem to iron out a lot of things. We try to prepare for the growth. We're trying to be user-friendly and be responsive to their needs. And with the staffing, again, if your individuals were coming, I know last time we were talking, 2 had no interest. I don't know where you are today. But obviously, it would be helpful to have individuals that are trained and familiar with IMC especially.
You just actually hit on something that I want to dig into a little bit more. So staffing was a nightmare when you came on board, but things seem to have leveled off.
Other than we have somebody out with the wrist injury, and last year we had somebody who cut himself open with some sort of power tool. We've been full complement. I hate even talking about it.
No, I don't want to jinx you.
Right. That's what happens, because these things can hit you in droves. But I would say since probably February of 2015, we've been stable. We've added the position.
Average length of service right now, we staff. I mean, ballpark for me.
Well, I got one guy that was in corrections for probably 12 years, so I wouldn't count him.
Right.
We have 3 that have roughly 3 years experience. Buffy and 3 years experience with us. We might have recruited them from other agencies.
That's fine.
And then we have one that he's a 20-something year employee, but bulk of that was the jail. Carol has probably got 10 years in, all with dispatch. She's retired military, I believe. And we have somebody that worked, was the Turner Fire, and he's been with us a year or 2. Over 2 now. So that pretty much the 9. And then we have one guy that came from the comm center. He's been with us probably a decade.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mike, to answer your question?
It does.
I'm just making sure. All right, then the next thing I saw was Fern.
Again, Fern Larsh up in town, and I don't want to make it seem like the audience is hostile by any means. I mean, and it sounds like you guys are doing a really good job as far as the communication center. I've had that opportunity over the last 11, 12 years to do most of those floor presentations, and what I think what scares a lot of people about the endeavor of not having control is what you actually was prior to you coming in, and some of the political atmospheres that actually follow along with county. I mean, it was not much more than a year ago that our town was actually part of a group suing the county for, practices we didn't really feel were fit. So, the idea of not knowing what the next administration will do is really concerning, not having that control. And going back to the point that Mr. Fillmore said earlier, and I totally agree with him, the technology has come a long ways. I truly feel that probably within 5 to 10 years that there will be less communication centers. Matter of fact, I doubt there will be 2 communication centers in Androscoggin County. I would assume at some point in time the technology and cost factor will make LA 911 and county be one.
Well, I think the reason why there's fewer now is because somewhere in the state, somebody decided there didn't need to be as many as there was probably 20 years ago. Yeah.
Cost of PSAPs.
And as of right now. you
Cost of
actually have
PSAPs, absolutely.
Major ones within a short distance between you in Auburn and LA 911. So I mean, I think as Lisbon, as we look at it, the idea of looking at this in kind of a heat of a budget scenario came about more in dollars and cents than it did the idea of people, laying on the side of the street because they're not getting service.
Oh, I didn't know if it was a financial or a practical aspect. I will tell you, in the brief conversation the chief and I had, he did bring up the concern of a change of administration. Now, I can't guarantee anything. I know I'm running the next time, but what I tried to tell him, and again, I'm not here to try and sway, but it is part of the conversation because it keeps brought up, and I will defend the organization I represent, so I hope you understand it does kind of put you in an uncomfortable situation. We're trying to create a solid foundation with our communication center. We're trying to structure it in a way that regardless of somebody's interest coming into the position, to the sheriff's office, that it's part of that organization. And we're trying to do it right. Our employees are unionized. Our administrator is part of the administrative unit, which is unionized. The commissioners and budget committee supported a significant investment into the facility. I'd like to say, much like the jail, it's a solid foundation, but we've seen the state try to grab that. I am trying to position myself, or the sheriff's office and our communications, to be a foundation of what the county can do, and to have staying power. So we don't have to go through, conversations like this. If there's to be a consolidation that's forced down the road when you talk PSAPs, I would like to be in a position to say, we've managed, we're effective, we've got the ability, we've got the footprint, we've got the score, and we've got community support as a regional center, because we are a county, regional center. So that's all part of the interest for me. Plus, in taking office, you want to accomplish things, and when I started my interest with the communications, that seemed to be a no-brainer for me because you're paying a county tax, and I know this is not about dollars, but overall, when I look at some of the smaller departments, so.
Going on that point, I mean, one of the things that we've found over the years is there's a lot of counties that actually have active consolidated dispatch and not actually run by the sheriff's department. They're actually run by a separate entity, so they're not affected by that political turmoil that happens in every election. Do you feel that Androscoggin will ever get to that point where it's not run by the sheriff, so it's actually more of an even playing field? Do you think that, because we're one of the few counties that actually the dispatch is run by the sheriff. Most of them, I think the bulk of them are actually run by a separate entity other than the sheriff.
I think if something's properly managed and running well and people are happy with the service, that, like somebody said, you don't mess with a good thing. So in the beginning of this, I needed to make sure I had the support of the commissioners, because dispatching issues, communication issues have always been contentious everywhere, and they did support what I was trying to do. So then I started working with communities and evolved. I did have two commissioners pull me aside, and they said, most counties, communications is an umbrella of the county. And I said, well, most counties aren't being sued by all of their towns. So if you want any opportunity for success, you're going to let me form the relationships, build the credibility with our agency. We have good working relationships. The animosities with the county part of it, not the sheriff's office side of it. Let me have a go of it, see what we can get done, do, see how we do it, and then evaluate it. And I've actually talked to Larry Post, the county administrator, because Cumberland, and we visited other sites to see how they're doing it, what works, what doesn't work. My hope is to have it so strong, such a strong unit that that conversation doesn't come up. Again, like when I talk to Chief, I know I'm running next term. I don't know if I'll win, but you want such a solid base that a sheriff coming in that has minimal interest, he'll have an administrator and staff in place that kind of can't let it fail. And some of the practices, like the users group, I think those things help out when you're looking for support of a division within the department. And it's big, and we've got people that we seldom deal with, and people that, because their frequency of calls, we're always talking to. And that's all great. It helps make the operation better.
I think in the past, some of the discussions that actually where they really got derailed was the idea that as a town, we basically kind of got in the tangle of the commissioners, and then the commissioners and the budget people of the county, the committee wasn't actually seeing eye to eye. So even everybody wasn't playing on the same playing field, I think, and that was one of the concerns we've always seen in the past, and maybe some of that's been.
No, I'll say, even with all the animosity, and that's what I viewed it as with the commissioners and the budget committee, this was something, and one of the, budget committee members said it, he said, I haven't seen a sheriff come in that had the interest of trying to accomplish something, so let's give it a go, and he supported it. But it was supported by, unanimously through the commissioners, and I think the budget committee, it was the same way 2 years in a row, because there was some significant investments made. It was probably the one thing, I think, for some reason, everybody saw eye to eye on, and that kind of represents all your communities. I think it's been declared through court ruling that the budget committee's role and maybe authority is a little different than once interpreted. I don't see that as the building block as much as we fight over $50. And we have stupid conversations about, tire irons. I don't know.
Right. And it goes on and on and on. You're
yeah,
right.
I don't think that when it comes to, I think people are starting to see the big picture of it all. And I think people don't want to be swallowed up into a system that they view as bloated and costly when there might be an opportunity for savings with this regional center. And I'm not saying that I have a great working relationship with LACOM. We work to partner with each other. They were incorporated in our expansion so we can have backup capabilities. This joint records management system is a huge benefit to our civil service, to our law enforcement, to our jail, and our jail provides a huge benefit towards all the law enforcement agencies on it. So there's things we do, investments we make together into that system that I want to continue, and because of the support we get there and how that affects the Sabatuses and the Livermore Falls and Mechanic Falls, or in some of the fire departments that may choose to use it, I think it's worked out great from a maintenance perspective, and to use it to as much of its capabilities as possible. So.
Last question, still on that knowledge one. If you were to see in 3 years from now, 2 years, or 5 years, that there would be a consolidation in the Boston Auburn area between two and getting into one major dispatch center, do you think the county would take over LA 911, which is a huge monster, or do you think that would be the other way around? Do you think county would actually merge into LA? Because that is, to me, a major factor when it comes to the idea of us as a community, because one, we know the cost, and the other one, we would actually, as numbers of years past, would actually be being the third largest community in county, we would actually have quite a.
I'm deliberately not going to answer you, but I will say, why would a regional center contract with a community when it exists, when a community can contract with a regional center? It would.
In years past, have been looked at both ways by commissioners.
And just to put all our cards on the table, at one point in time, I was on the LA 911 committee. Again, I'm hoping that we both survive as PSAPs and we enjoy the relationship backing each other up that we do now. I think it works well. And that has nothing to do with Lisbon, but it's just talking about how it goes. But if all of a sudden it's determined that there can only be 16 PSAPs in the state, well, somebody's going to fold. They already know we're not, we have no desire to. So I don't know who would sort that out. I think the decision will be made somewhere else. Yeah.
Can I add something to that? Yes, there's been a lot of talk about consolidation, and in my experience, the reason for consolidation is cost of PSAP operations. So the state provides the next-gen 911 system. Well, there's techs that are monitoring those systems 24/7. Literally, a keyboard fails on the 911 system, the tech will automatically show up at our center and take care of it for us. What we've been trying to do with LA 911 is virtually consolidate our computer systems. They have the main server, where we have the redundant failover server. So they need us as much as we need them. We're doing that on communications now. We're building our new communications center with not just enough desks to satisfy the people that we have today, but if LA 911 has a fire truck fall through the ceiling, or an 18-wheeler goes off the road and hits their center, they need to still run the operation. So we're building that as an emergency evacuation center for them, with full access to all the systems, nothing's going down.
That's more likely to happen in Auburn.
Well, when this renovation is complete, it's going to be able to have all the desks that we need fully operable, but we'll also have backup desks available for LACOM. And that was designed with Phyllis so we could work together and have that, even keel. Right now, the records management server is housed at LACOM. That works well. They're maintaining it. We all contribute into that. There's a fee that's built in every year for their maintenance. I guess if all of a sudden one were to close, it would be where does the server go, and that's part of it, because records management is turning into a big part of communications.
I think this community as a whole, I'm whether they're a mile apart from each other, it's the same operational cost. So I don't think the pressure from PSAP consolidation is going to be what it was back when there was 40-something PSAP.
Last time they did it.
In the past, it wasn't so much it was more of a political, I think, discussion more in years past than it was a common sense discussion coming up through this.
I'm going to keep moving the room. The point was made associated with LA 911. I just want to make it known the fact that I did invite Paul Leclerc. He has a previous engagement, so he wasn't able to make here tonight, to be able to hear from LA 911 side of things as well too. He is interested in the dialogue to at least hear that part of it as well. Chief heard a couple of different times, and Fern brought it up last, associated with technology levels associated with that. Is there any issue on the foreseeable horizon associated with technology for our current comm center arrangement?
No, sir.
I needed to hear that associated with that. There's a soundbite that actually happened outside of this discussion. Can you talk just about consolidation of IMC in general associated with just the software and nothing related to moving dispatch? And is there an opportunity there?
I don't believe so. We're talking about just combining IMC services and not.
What we would end up doing, and we had actually looked at just the IMC consolidation, which
Yep.
we can't do. It's just not practical. It's like coming on with no other aspect of it, if that's what you're asking.
I just
In the
don't
grand
know.
scheme of things, what would happen here is if you would contract with us, we would take all your data out of your server.
Yep.
We put it in LA Comm server. We'd build you into the system, and you would receive your IMC services like everybody else does. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so the point I'm making is there's still a point that we're going to have to absorb that cost regardless of where it's at. There's no
You would have to pay
IMC on our own.
If you look at, there is a breakdown. You would have to still pay for your licensing,
Yep, because it's ours.
and you'd see a reduction because you're no longer a host. But
Would it be that 4,000? It wouldn't be the amount that we're paying now, is what you're saying.
right, it looks like the estimate we've got is $4,095 for police and $1,710 for fire. That's
Right.
compared to what you're paying now.
And right now, we're paying 15,268 for police and 3,400 for fire. So you're saying that wouldn't exist, and the lower amounts would?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Okay, so that's the only difference, whether we host or not. That's trying to put my head around that. Yeah, I'm coming back, Mike. Sorry, you're on the next wave. The next hand I saw was our school committee chair.
I just wanted to see if we were going to move along with hearing from Public Works how.
Yes, we absolutely are going to get there. Yes, sir.
On Mike Robital's question about EMD training,
That actually came from Mr. Moore.
and Mr. Moore, we have 9 dispatchers, I believe, right now, and 5 of those did have the EMD dispatch training, but they never renewed their certifications, which they have to do every 2 years.
Yeah, that's when we lost the PSAP. Lisbon was a PSAP. We were a PSAP. And when the state
Consolidated.
consolidated all the PSAPs, they took Lisbon's PSAP out. There's a closet over there that had all the equipment in it for the PSAP. So Lisbon was a full-fledged, full-staff PSAP when it was running. When the state consolidated the PSAPs, they came in with a truck and yanked everything out and said, "See you later, thanks." So there was no need after that to maintain the EMD side of it.
Well, if
Because there was a
we're
911.
using 2,500 to have our dispatchers receive emergency calls, they should be qualified as EMD personnel in order to provide the emergency medical code to EMTs.
I'm with you.
And That's the third time I've heard that same comment tonight. I don't think we're covering new ground. I don't want to dismiss it. The original question that was asked associated with that is the original call, if it starts in county, EMD, if it's necessary, it's automatically routed to Lisbon. If anybody calls 2500, aid is actually sent, and if there's mutual aid that's necessary, our dispatcher reaches out to county. And I'm not covering new.
That's not always that. We don't always go to county for mutual aid.
Okay, so if,
our dispatchers reach out to any mutual aid company that.
so mutual aid and thank you for clarifying.
You gotta be careful about mutual aid too, because you might be talking about two different things.
Okay.
Typically, when you talk mutual aid, you're talking fire related.
Whatever mutual aid agreements for all the variety of services that we have, right? Mr. Robitaille?
I was just gonna ask if we could hear from, like, the school
Yeah.
or Public Works, how this is
Yeah.
gonna affect our government, but, and then if I have one more other comment, if this is not about dollars, then if it's not about dollars, it's about savings. We're saving time, as Mr. Fillmore has stated, and certainly the dispatch, EMD is gonna be better from the county. My only comment there is that if it's not about money, then let's take some of this money, if you so choose to eliminate the dispatch center, take some of this savings monies, let's put it back into the police department, just as the study that was done a year ago and was put on the council desk clearly stated, and we have two patrolmen at nighttime for officer safety. Again, if it's not about money,
Right.
if it's about money, different story. It's just my thought.
Can we, before we move on, I'd like to have you sitting here because you actually mentioned it in your original points that we actually maintain radio dispatch with all of our other entities. Before I alleviate you and move to the next person, why don't we talk about how that would actually operate in the new environment if we go there?
Well, I don't believe county would maintain radio contact with Public Works or the school department or any of our town.
No, we would do the emergency services, it would be, as we
Right.
discussed a year ago,
Dispatch.
we would keep a call log if somebody were to call in, like, one of your patrolmen are out there, can you call Public Works, and we would call your contact. But as far as dispatching for Public Works, or there was an individual from the school department or the transportation that stopped by to see how that was gonna work, it's not something we do. And I think what you were talking about doing, from the sounds of it, or it sounded like there was a potential to do, was similar to a setup like Sabatis has, where they have a dispatcher available during the day.
Right. Yeah, if we had somebody there during the day monitoring the front desk, they would still be able to, monitor the radios during the normal business hours, which is most likely when the school, Public Works will
Right.
be out.
But anything after that 4 to 5 o'clock hour, when we decide the administration person goes, we go silent with anything on our end maintaining radio communication.
That would be my recommendation, rather than have somebody there 24/7 at this point. If they're not actually dispatching, I would recommend that we don't have anybody in there.
And moving right down that list, if we don't have somebody actually on site to be able to see after hours, the next thing that would go for service related would be our lockup.
I would recommend, if we didn't have two officers working at the time, I would not recommend, and I wouldn't allow my officers to be in here with a prisoner
Right.
just by themselves with no oversight, yes.
Likewise, in that regard, if we're paying for 2 officers, they're not paid to actually be administrative staff here. You're pushing our officers to actually be out in the street and actually hit more of our community. I know you talked about it recently at one of your updates on releasing the 60-mile cap. So in that, with nobody here, we wouldn't be able to have that lockup because there's nobody on site to monitor cameras and sound, correct?
In the overnight app, right now, we, somewhere between 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. to that 7 a.m. window.
Is blank.
That's when I wouldn't recommend we have any arrests in here.
Can I back up just a little bit? When we're talking about Public Works and School Dispatch covered by if we put somebody in during normal business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about a 7-day-a-week coverage?
I would suggest just Monday through Friday, normal business hours. Otherwise, now you're talking about hiring a second person.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with
Yeah.
that. I wanted to understand what
Yep.
we all say, normal business hours, is that during the regular work week? Because I know we have coverage right now that supplies for all 7 days, so that's why I just want to, understand what we have now versus what we'd be going to.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next point that I had, Chief, was entering service call information into IMC. Is that where you were referring to the fact that with working with Mr. Moore, if we wanted to track certain types of things, we're doing more and entering in IMC, or is that something that would be picked up actively by dispatch?
Currently, our communications officers are entering everything into IMC. The
Yep.
patrol officers can do some. It'd be one of those things, if we went to Androscoggin County, they would be
Picked in
entering.
that.
Yes.
But to being able to tailor for additional beyond that, you mentioned, was it excessive force?
Yeah, and I just do that
You know,
as an
exactly. It's an example. You're right.
There's still a process. We could still contact county and say, we would like to track this.
Right.
Can you put that in? And,
There's no guarantees, everything for a price.
Also, even if we consolidated, wouldn't the officers be able to access that same IMC from their cruisers or from
Yes.
here? So they'd still be able to do that.
Yes.
And it sounds to me like you're talking about creating like a module within, or maybe an administrative module within IMC, is that?
Well, you're looking to compile data from reports.
I'm just talking about clearance codes. Right now, we might clear something as a burglary, or we take somebody into protective custody, and I'm just talking about potential
Right.
of adding just a second.
I know it was way down on your list, but you mentioned
Yeah.
it, so that's why I was just actually going.
Yes, sir.
But
Okay.
it would be something that would normally be picked up
I was just trying to
by
follow
county.
what.
Yeah,
what
right.
the-
Just
train
a
of thought.
simple
I
clearance
get it.
Because Mechanic Falls had an issue of not being able to use the administrative portion of IMC to do administrative reports that they didn't want in the system. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but no, it
Okay.
wouldn't be anything along those
All right.
lines.
Okay. Bail, that's picked up on the county side at that point because that's where they'd be locked up. Cross-agency checks for officers in the field. The fact is that something completely be picked up by county?
If we were with county, when our IMC software would just automatically, I run John Smith that I run into on Lisbon Street, it would automatically download anything that anybody in the county had been dealing with.
So the officers getting the real-time information in their vehicle?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what are our current level of dispatch actually giving them that they're not currently seeing, I guess? Is it just because you mentioned the local database versus the county databases?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm just talking a greater database.
No, that's all I wanted to just get clarification. I'm comparing something that was written in 2012 to what you've given us for the pros and cons tonight. Any other questions of Chief before I let him give up the seat?
Just to clarify, on cross-agency, that's a statewide
Yep.
database that any department that pays for cross-agency licensing can access databases in any department in Maine that has that module. So, for example, Brunswick, Freeport, Somerset County, York, a lot of counties down south all have cross-agency. So I can plug in a name in cross-agency and run it, and I'll get a list of all the contact that person has had through agencies that have IMC that pay for cross-agency. And I can go in and look at whatever their reports are on that person.
Okay. So it is.
And they're looking at expanding that now with the hub, so we can actually go into New Hampshire and Massachusetts.
So
But
it is an apples to apples.
we host that now on our switch here. I don't
Okay.
know what will happen.
It is an apples to apples, and that's why I was
I don't know if
asking.
it will stay here on our switch or go to, I don't know where your switch is.
The state actually hosts the switch and feed back to all of you're submitting data which the state will take, and you can feed that data to, like you said, all those other agencies, Bridgeton, Freiburg, all of them. So it's a nice setup.
So our mobile switch is hosted here.
Okay.
And if we went to them, I don't know where our switch would go, our mobile switch.
Okay.
Yeah, I think LA has it right now.
Thank you, Harry. Moving right along. Chief Gallipo.
Sir, you're up.
Absolutely.
I'll get the seat. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's going to be several questions that just kind of fire off each other here. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. Sure.
It's your dime. Anything you've heard pros and cons?
Just the mutual aid aspect of, I think there's a little bit of clearance there. Typically, the fire department runs, our dispatchers are our focal point, our communications utmost importance, right? They're my lifeline or anybody's lifeline as far as when we establish command, to get resources to the scene. So our communications officers, span of control, we didn't really started talking about span of control. It was elaborated a little bit as far as having one individual there, our span of control. If there's more things going on, it kind of jeopardizes sometimes what's going on with only having one dispatcher there. Our busy times, having two dispatchers there is definitely an asset and helps us out, immensely. So typically, when first establishing command and on a working fire type situation, I'm with the dispatcher, or whoever's in command with the dispatcher is basically there for the first 25 minutes or so until we can get things established. And then we're pretty much self-supported once resources are on scene. So that typical, that person to go to, he has all the lists of who we use for mutual aid and everything else. So on a gist of it, that's pretty much the gist of how we use the dispatcher as far as calls are concerned. We have grown very well. When all three services are coming out now, we use the unified command, meaning when, police, fire, and EMS are going out. Traffic accident, let's just say. We have some dispatchers right now that are simulcasting all three at the same time, so only one tone is going out. Instead of going to three different frequencies, they're actually grouping all three frequencies together and putting us all out to go out to that one call that we're all going to receive at the same time. I've worked with patrol very adamantly about the fact that when command is established, that everything, because of span of control with the dispatcher, everything goes through that one command if we can. Just the patrol personnel have worked very well with us as far as we'll get the immediate hazard command established and all that done, and then the dispatchers kind of given to them so that they can run the police type, the 1028s and all that type stuff that they have to run. So before it was, they were picking up the phone or they were trying to call him on the other frequency while we're trying to call, for more resources, and we're tying up the same guy in two different frequencies when we don't need to do that.
You say frequencies, and the fact is this is all being done through radio?
Majority of the time, right. Police and fire and EMS are all on separate frequencies, which means to transmit on a separate you have to hit a button to be able to talk on that frequency. You have to open the frequency up to make that.
When we talk radio frequencies, then I guess I'm trying to dumb it down to me on this. And the fact is, are we talking what would actually go dark after 5, or is that something that a county picks up? It's
No,
totally
that
different
would
radio?
be what county would be taking over the frequency, basically.
Okay.
What we talk on, they would be actually talking that.
Okay. So it is, okay, thank you.
It's an active frequency. Police,
Right,
all
right,
three of them
right.
would be.
For your and my purposes, if you were to like to keep somebody here during the day, that person's going to flick a switch when they come in the morning, so they're doing their dispatching, and they're going to flick a switch when they leave at night, so it comes back to us. I don't know what that actually means, but it's working in Sabatis. We did it before with Sabatis, so both of us are working off the same frequencies, which are yours.
My limited background on that is I've actually had to do that. I called dispatch at Sabatis and ended up with one of our cruisers because it was prior to actually yours. So that when you flip that switch, I'm literally getting one of our patrolmen because our dispatcher is actually in the middle of another call.
And sometimes, in
Right.
Sabatis, I don't know what other, but she's also their court officer, so
Right.
we obviously dispatch whenever she's not in the office.
Right. Thank you, Chief. Keep going. Still your dime.
Any other questions that you had as far as our general operation? I mean, it's pretty cut and dry because we're not running as much background and everything else as far, It's establishing, calling our mutual aid companies, it's calling CMP when needed. Other resources are basically what we use dispatch for. So.
You had a hand here, I saw it too.
Well, I was just thinking what you said there. I just kind of want to go back to make sure that I was understanding it right, because I, like you, I want it down to the lowest possible, easiest to digest form. So flipping the switch as it sits now, is that what you're saying? The switch gets flipped, we dispatch, because we don't. I would know obviously.
Well, not right now.
Yeah,
but let's say if you
move.
were to contract with us, but want to elect to keep somebody Monday through Friday business, whatever it would be.
Right.
For lack of a better term, I don't know what they're actually doing, but 1 minute they're not dispatching and the next minute they are. So there's a switch that's being flicked somewhere to operate them so this becomes fully functional again. And then when they go to lunch or whatever, they call us, hey, I'm going to run paperwork to district court. It's that way we're aware we're getting the calls again.
Okay.
It's always nice to have a heads up.
So we'd have somebody engaged here, able to dispatch some and or all of the calls, and then they get a call, so they're going to flip the switch so that anything else comes in while they're engaged, it would go to you? Or
No,
am I
you wouldn't need to do that.
Yeah.
If you were Lewiston or Auburn, I'd say yeah, probably, because they're call after call after call. But for the most part, they would handle all their calls. Otherwise, you're having two separate locations dispatching the same units, and it would probably create you a lot of confusion.
Okay.
But there was something else you hit on. And I'm probably going to say this wrong, but while we're on fire, and feel free to correct me, we had issues with departments that some of them do things different ways. So we do sit down and work with the fire departments about their protocols. We do also try to get them to standardize everything through our workers group. Usually they get along pretty well together, but that is something we don't dictate how we're delivering the service. We work with the agencies to say what's the best practice for all involved, and keeping in mind where we have 12 different or 10 different departments we're dispatching for, let's try to make some common themes to the service.
Chief Galpo, I don't know if you're actively involved in the mutual aid with the fire department in Stratton County, but my users group acts as a subsidiary of that mutual aid group, and it's actually working out very well. And we've talked about various things from a county-wide dispatch fire channel, and the pros and cons of that to how you're getting your run sheets, how your mutual aid is automatically being toned out and for what reason. So,
Chair.
Yep.
Your clarification, I don't, in past, when we actually talked about when we had dispatch away, basically the person during the day, I was always assumed that was gonna be more of an admin person. I mean, Chief, do you actually expect 8 hours a day that there's actually someone to be dispatching through that, or is not more of an admin person just greeting people as they come in?
No, it'd be more of an admin person just sitting there greeting people as they come in.
It wouldn't be any switch on and off, it'd still be full-time dispatch through county.
Yes.
Personnel front would just be a receptionist.
Receptionist, I'm talking about the face-to-face.
Exactly, it's just, because it seems like we may be going a different direction, but in past, it's been just an admin person that does not answer emergency calls and dispatches, basically is there to greet somebody coming through.
No, I mean, the option is always there, if that's what they decided was the better idea to do it, have an actual dispatcher there. But my thought process initially was just an admin.
But it would take us more of a trained person to actually be able to do the dispatch
Yes.
versus the idea of administration.
Yes.
That's a specialty position.
Correct, yeah. It just seems that we're going in two different directions with that, so I just
Yeah,
wanted
no,
to make sure
thank
that's clear, that's all.
If,
So I have a question, Alan.
yep, Shelley?
Alan, Sean, when you said call mutual aid, so they would contact the water department?
Correct. Right. When
They,
whoever is dispatching for us is that individual
that wouldn't get lost going to county?
that would have to be, that would be things that we would be discussing as far as our operation and what our responsibilities are as our communications officers are on the fire side, is if you guys would be taking over those same responsibilities.
So,
Water department pumps the hydrants in the wintertime. We use a hydrant. You need to notify the water. Yeah,
Well,
we could know, like Mechanic Falls They has a have the red on-call. flashing light somewhere. The patrolman will say, hey, can you call the water? And we do. That's what I'm saying. We establish books for each town to have their contacts. If the police officer out on the street says this is going on, we look in and know who to call. So, yeah, it would just be
Not to
building
take
that.
away from Ryan's thunder, but it would be the same idea as far as Public Works is concerned. If patrol says, hey, we're starting to get slick out here, we need to be on duty.
we call them. We do it for DOT too.
Right. Both an electronic copy to the workstation and a backup hard copy. And that's everything from all your road names, to all your personnel for each department. If you're on call, and sometimes it changes from week to week or month to month. And we do just take your requests. Certain time of the request, us to call an ambulance or something like that. Obviously take care of that right off the bat.
So, just so I heard you say something, I want to make sure I heard it. So you're saying there's a web resource initially, and then there's the backup hard copy?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other service issues to address if we were to go in this direction from your perspective, sir?
I've always stated all along from when we first started this before 2009, there was a few before that, that on the county level that we all used to get together and talk about. Level of service cannot be diminished, and I've been adamant about that. I'm still adamant about that. The fire department's at a certain level, EMS, all of us, all the public safety within the town are at a certain level, and we cannot diminish those services whatsoever, regardless of who's pushing the button. Understandingly that there's issues that we have to work through either way, so, or in either position. So, but I'm just adamant that our level of service definitely needs to stay the same, if not get better.
And your view on our current level of service is?
I think our current level is maintaining. I mean, we
No, your personal view on our current level of service.
is good. I've been working with it for the last
Good's a non-word. Give me.
sufficient.
It's still, that's like
You
fine.
want
with it.
exceptional?
Yeah. I'm trying
we
to
have
your opinion on it, and just give me a little more than one word. That's all I was pushing. Yeah.
a strong 7.
Okay.
There's always room for improvement,
Right.
And that's that. I think that's key with any organization. I mean,
Right.
we have areas that we could be, and that's where the span of control is kind of a pet peeve with mine. Is that one dispatcher, I feel personally, isn't sufficient.
Right.
Because things can go crazy at any given time. Especially when we were doing Sabattis, Durham, when all of us were being dispatched. Now, our mutual aid was called a lot faster because it was only pushing a button. It wasn't a phone call. But at that point, now we just took our span of control for our dispatcher and said, okay, we're going to go from the 3 services that we have in town to adding 2 more, which is 2 mutual aid companies coming in, which is basically, can an individual, really an individual can only talk to 7 people efficiently. After that, you're starting to lose. So, same idea. So that's more so my issue with what we have right now.
Right.
Is
No, I made that note clearly out of the gate. The fact is, you referenced it when you started. One dispatcher, when something does happen, you don't have the ability to respond to peaks and valleys.
Right.
And that's true in any dispatch center.
Correct.
Right.
It's something he said that we kind of, we didn't talk about, if you don't mind, just me taking a second of your time. Where the sheriff's office has 4 divisions, corrections, patrol, civil, and communications, one of the things we set out to do right away is make sure to let the other divisions know that communications is a division that stands on its own, part because of some of the parochial issues a lot of centers see, or a lot of, like, say, agencies see from a center. We don't want to do that. So we don't have patrolmen going into our jail telling corrections officers what to do. And we definitely don't have patrolmen any longer going to our communication center and telling our dispatchers what to do. The dispatchers were all instructed, and it was, for lack of a better term, beat into them, that you will treat Sabattis like you treat the SO, like you treat Mechanic Falls. I don't want to hear or see any differences. I think it's worked effectively. We've changed the administrative structure of it, just in fact, in part to deal with some of those things, because we really want equal distribution, because we didn't want to see the lapse or have anybody feel like, well, they pay more attention to their animal control officer than they do to us. And the other issue is, in fairness, when we started looking at the issues with our center, I would have rated it at a 2. It needed work. I think now we're probably at a 6. But we're continuing to identify and work through our problems. With any agency coming on, I'm sure there's been what we call speed bumps or issues, we work through them, we work with the agencies together, and it's just the communication going back and forth. So I don't want you to think if you were to come on that, wow, everything is, peaches and cream. But if you were to come on, obviously we'd work through any of the concerns or issues you may have. And if you are to stay the way you are, I'd enjoy the relationship that we've had historically. I think the chief and I have talked about things we need to do with the departments with training issues to kind of get the guys on the floor, on boots on the ground, working together. And he invited us to a training to reestablish those relationships, because 15 years ago we used to go to regular trainings, whether it was active shooter training or things like that with Lisbon PD, and those kinds of things went away. Well, we kind of want to bring back that, we're working together, because when there's a call for help, like we talk mutual aid, even with fire, we're going to be each other's resources. So I definitely don't want any ill will, regardless of what happens with this situation, because I think the chief and everything will make some progress in other areas.
Anything else of, yep,
Can I
Mike?
ask a question to the chief?
Please.
I'm just curious, what about the radio communications for portable radios? The fire department works on a fire ground system, same as our law enforcement officers. Has there been any testing been done with the county dispatch on how our portable radios for our patrolmen and for our firefighters are going to get back to the county? And if that hasn't been done, is that a hidden cost that we're not aware of? I'm just curious.
We're going to be running through your base stations. There'll be no change. We're running through, and I don't know how your equipment works now. We're assuming it looked like a good setup when we evaluated it 2 years, last year, whatever it was. Site visits were done with everybody, whether it was IMC, tech people, radio, and what was determined is if you're going to leave your base stations in play here, the most cost-effective way to deliver the service is just connectivity to the county, and that's what these costs that you see reflect.
Thank you.
So that'll be how it goes.
So, Chief, back to your presentation, the last workshop, back to the 40, 50 grand for the radios to be able to maintain base communication is outside this discussion to address Mike's concern, correct?
Yes, we have issues, and we're
You've
gonna be
identified 'em.
addressing 'em, so
Right.
to make this more effective. I mean, we have these issues that we're gonna address either way.
It's not related to this conversation, but
Yes,
to the sheriff's point, it needs to be addressed.
And part of the problem when you talk LA 911, when I had counselors coming to me saying, why can't you, save us money and do this? I had to explain to them LA 911 budget, which you might be a little familiar with, contains capital items that, in our side, our patrol budget, like it sounds like yours, is going to contain the items for the capital improvements regarding the radio, because I'm going to have a dispatch center whether I have a patrol division.
Right.
So my patrol division is going to pick up the capital chunk on their communication issues throughout the county, where the comm center in Lewis and Auburn, I know that doesn't matter here, but they kind of funnel it all in through there, so their costs are a lot more. They got to be paid somewhere anyway.
And that was fire only, PD only. What he had talked about a couple meetings ago as far as the repeaters was PD only. Fire repeaters working fine, everything's working out good.
Right. Any other questions of Chief Gallipo before we let him alleviate the seat? How about Lisbon emergency?
Chief McDonald. You're the next contestant.
I'm Jim McCollum, the chief of Lisbon Emergency. And as the police chief says, there's pros and cons. Right now, one of the pros is PD knows when we go out. So if we need PD help, they're right there. They go on most of our calls. Just wondering, would they know if we went to Androscoggin?
Yeah, currently right now, our Poland Patrol life-saving calls or lift assist calls, or depending if we know the area calls. When I say that, that sounds not if we know the area, but our patrolmen go to the calls if we know the area. Follow what I'm saying? So that would still happen. Turner Rescue, same thing. We monitor theirs, so they go not as frequently as they do in, let's say, Poland, but the same thing would happen. They'd be advised. Poland right now is a contract town for the county, so County 9, which is a Poland unit, rescue's going to Hardscrabble Road for chest pain. Okay, and in a lot of times they'll go. So you would still have that advisory. It would be up to the patrolman whether they go or not.
Another pro is I can go in at 2 o'clock in the morning and get a report that we need to finish our state report. If we went to Androscoggin, we probably would have to wait till the morning to get that.
No, just show up with $5. No, I'm just kidding. I know that for your insurance purposes, or at least with Durham, I dealt with it more because they wanted the information right away. We got them the information they needed. As far as the official report,
Your run sheets, as soon as your last truck gets in the barn, if you will.
Yep.
The run sheet is printed and either faxed or emailed to you.
All right.
or both.
One of the cons is if the call comes into 2,500, it's not EMD, and that can put us behind the 8 balls. For example, call came into Lisbon for lift assist. Me and the paramedic showed up, and the guy was barely breathing. We didn't have, if it came in through an EMD code, we would have started the fire to give us a hand. And with the EMD code, I'm working with SAG at Saginaw County, and we're going to CQI a quality improvement from the start of the call till the patient leaves the hospital. So it will be one flow CQI, and I'm hoping to start doing that with Androscoggin soon.
So, am I the only one that kind of got lost in that room on that discussion? Are you saying that it's a kind of a limitation of the 2,500 and a plus to the going through the county?
Yeah.
That's what I thought you were saying. I just wanted to make that clear.
And also with the loss of revenue statement that was made earlier and what everybody's mission is, I did meet with the rescue personnel approximately a year ago, and at that time, I advised them and the board to stand pat with the service they were getting now, for a lot of reasons. So, regardless of the perception of this meeting, I have a desired outcome, but I'm not here.
Right.
Okay?
No.
And I think meeting with that board is proof that I'm not here to undermine any.
No.
That's
We were saying the same thing associated with that, and I wanted you actually to be a part of the discussion, not a part of the problem that was perceived.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That was my point. You get enough from the county on a regular basis. Keep going, sir.
That's basically it. To improve services, we need the EMD code if they give it to Lisbon Comm Center or if they give it to us directly. That is the future of Maine EMS, is emergency dispatch. A few years ago, they tried to pass this statewide to make it mandatory, and the fire chiefs, a lot of them said, "You're not telling me how to respond to a call," code 1 or 3, so it got shut down then. And Maine EMS is bringing it up within the next year, from what I hear.
It's actually already passed. We have to start fire, like we discussed earlier, the fire protocol, we're going to start in February, which we advise the commissioners and I believe the budget committee, maybe not, I mean, I talk a lot. But we have to address staffing at that time. We had put in a staffing request thinking it was going to hit us in February, but then when we got word it wouldn't hit us till September, we took staffing off the table because the EMD and the Q&A involved, whether it's fire or rescue, is time consuming, but it's valuable information. It's quality assurance. So we know in September we'll be starting that with fire protocols as well.
So, I guess this question would be for the sheriff then. The information you gave us associated with dispatch, that includes Lisbon Emergency?
Yeah, as I had a conversation with one of the two of the administrative people.
Okay.
The county, the service is with the sheriff's office.
Yep.
The little fee here, per capita fee, that's the whole commissioner's thing.
I know.
When it was brought to our attention when we were going through this process last year, it seemed like there was 3 commissioners at the time. There was a lot going on. Fire rescue was an issue specifically because of Lisbon, and we had one other rescue provider that wanted us to dispatch for them, and it had to do with Livermore Falls and the J area. Anyway, the fire rescue is a joint fee. It was never separated. I think them coming up with a fee structure was out of, political discourse. I think the adjustment was made last year because it hadn't been adjusted in 10 years. So yes, the fire rescue is one fee. When I was speaking to somebody here earlier, I said maybe Lisbon picks up the tab, or maybe they work with rescue to determine what's a fair, and you handle that, but we would bill the town, the PSAP, police and fire,
Right.
Because that's consistent with how we do the billing, and you would allow the rescue to work with the town to determine.
It's for us to sort out with the Lisbon emergency.
There
Right.
you go. Because actually, when I met with them, that was part of the conversation. If you were to come on now, I'd have to bill you. If they were to come on next year or the year after, I'd have to bill them. Well, and then it would have
Got
created
muddy.
a mess.
Muddy. Yep. Yep.
We just put a new telephone system in Lisbon. If we put the automated message that says, if this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. That would assist the EMTs, and it would get the emergency medical code to them that they need.
As long as their heart doesn't stop when they hang up, or as long as their house doesn't burn down. No offense, Larry.
So I have a question. Is when people are calling the 353 number, is that impacting your job in a negative way versus calling the 911?
Time.
It could
Time.
slow down getting resources in. The EMD code is Alpha, which is low priority. Bravo, Delta, and Echo are your two top priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And Echo calls is like that is imminent. That's going to happen, so we need to get there as soon as we can. To answer your question, they receive the call, they give it to Lisbon Com. If we get that code, it will only be the transfer time that we're delayed.
Mr. LaRochelle, I saw you first.
Just a question. I know in the past, and Lisbon Emergency has always been a very valuable asset to the town. There's no question about it. But being a private entity in our part of the town, it's always been kind of that balance. So I guess I didn't understand how the structure was going to go. Now, is the price structure that we see listed there including our Lisbon
Yes.
Emergency?
Yes.
So, and then we would actually, as a town, have to try to negotiate.
Sort out between the emergency.
Because, I mean, one of the things that I think is important to know, I mean, I wouldn't want to see it all, because, I mean, you still contract with Bowden, right? With TAGROP, so I mean, I'm not sure, what's the number of your calls versus Lisbon versus SAG? I mean, it's kind of
Bowden's
balanced almost.
200 calls, and Lisbon falls 800.
800, so is it a quarter of the calls? I mean, you definitely just gonna have Lisbon
Yep.
taking the tab for
Yep.
actually dispatching out of the county. But on the other hand, I mean, I guess the biggest concern always in the past is the idea of making your financials doable. The idea of going to county won't actually affect your initial financials, because I'm not sure how much out of that dollar actually is considered for
Correct.
EMS, which that'd probably be hard to quantify. I'm not sure if they do that for other communities. Is there other communities that you do just their rescue, or all the package?
You're like one of the only community based like that. The other organization is up northern end, and they're not subject to one town. So we kind of looked at how did this come about. There was something about constitutionality, so we looked at everything last year to know that we could provide the service for Lisbon Rescue. The other agency, I think, is it North Star?
North Star.
Yeah, they're a whole different operation. The way the county commissioners set up the per capita fee was just per capita for community. So you're in a unique situation where it's able to do. But no, we have no others. Turner Rescue is affiliated with Turner Fire, and I think that's why they created this fee structure. I was no part of it, but it was fire rescue, police, and then PSAP. So.
Just another question too, I mean, because it's been brought up a couple times, is as Marty was referred to about 2,500 and calling. I mean, I grew up with the idea that 353, 2,500 was the number to call, because that's just what you did. Being in a business, been here for 50 years. Now, maybe Harry can actually give us an idea. What's the percentage of emergency calls that the ambulance goes out to that actually comes in as 353, 2,500? I mean, is it actually less than 1%, or is it actually, can you give me because we make it sound like it's a big number, but I assume 911 is actually a majority of the calls for ambulance.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna talk about is, again, I don't wanna confuse something that's already really confusing. But when you talk about the 353-2500 line, that can ring in a couple different ways. But one way is if you have a landline and you call 2500, 353-2500, it's a direct line right to the comm center. If you call that on your cell phone, that will be a direct call to the comm center. If you dial 911, depending on where you are, it's either going to hit the state or it's going to hit the county, because we've had 911s dumped on us from both the county and the state. What they do is they forward that line through 2500 typically. So when our dispatcher answers, they'll say, this is the county, or this is State Police Gray, or whoever it might be. We have an emergency at so-and-so. We're EMDing the call. We need your EMS to respond, or whatever the call is. So the large majority of the calls that we get come in through the 2500 line, only because they're being forwarded on that line, not because they're direct calls to that line. People aren't calling saying, I've cut my artery with a chainsaw. Usually they're going to call 911, and then that will come into us on 2500. So if I did research on that, I'm probably going to find that nearly all of them come in on 2500. They're not coming in directly from the people that are requesting the service, if you get what I'm saying. And what percentage that is, I can find out. I don't know that.
It seems though there's we actually live in a community now that not a lot of people reflect that. At 911 is the uniform. Everybody knows, and every child that goes through school knows that dial 353. 353-2500 is more of a personal line than 911 is for.
Right. Well, I mean, the last quarter on all of our phone lines, we've got 3 lines and 2 911 ring down lines that the county. I think the county should be pushing the ring down line that's coming in on, not coming in on 2500, but coming on the other ones. Because we've now lost, with the new phone system, we've lost our recording abilities with instant recall, although that's in the cloud somewhere with Oxford that we still haven't got that figured out yet. But the 2500s that are coming in we're being recorded. So if somebody said, if they say, I need this, I need that, I need this, and they hang up, if we didn't get a callback number, or we don't have a callback number, we could play that recording back and at least get where if they said where they were, at least we can find that out again in the recording. So I think in the last quarter of 2016, we had over 10,000 phone calls.
Is it 2500?
No, on our 3 lines. It's
all direct utilization, all three numbers, right.
And then they'll drop down. If that's busy, they'll drop to the next one and then the next one.
Right. Can you research that just to give Chief perspective on percentage of those that actually are not being forwarded, just to give a volume on that?
Absolutely.
Just to, if nothing else, it addresses whether the fact is it the issue or what's the potential on that amount of volume for the issue. How's that for a non-answer? Anything else of Lisbon EMS before we let him leave the seat? All right, rock, scissors, paper, shoot. Who's up next? Tracy wants to go. Let's hear from the school department.
No, Sheriff, you can sit. I'll stand, I'm good.
I'll wait 3 chairs.
I've been sitting a while.
All right, so
Thank you for bringing Alan.
Yes.
Thank you,
Well,
Alan.
we know the answer is more, that he's more qualified for the answers than I am. So in preparation for this evening, having the request from the town council, I asked the superintendent to contact as many superintendents as possible regarding bus monitoring, which is what currently kind of happens during the business hours, where they're listening to our radios, monitoring. If there's an issue that they know about, they'll make a contact call to the buses, and vice versa if there's an issue. Obviously Alan's monitoring because he has a radio as well as hubs in each of the schools. So I just wanted to find out what other school departments have for services. As it turns out, we are extremely lucky. Most of the other school districts that replied, there were 7 of them that replied from all parts of the state, do not believe, and some of them wouldn't needed to ask their transportation directors, but they are not monitored. So it's just kind of an internal communication system, which I am here to present you facts and not my opinion. So I just wanted to let you know that we currently have the service. Others operate without it, and I think that having the radios, Alan's department would be able to monitor if you chose to go to the regional call center, that we would be able to monitor all of that ourselves. It's just a different type of a level of awareness, whereas we've had somebody listening, having ears on, and being able to immediately, whatever the situation is. I mean, to be honest, we haven't had a ton of situations.
And very fortunate, yes.
But what if you wanted to tell them like a typical thing that PD might interrupt for?
Weather conditions, some of the road conditions. I'll have a bus driver, give me a jingle on the radio and say, "Hey, Alan, Boneham Road is slippery." A lot of times, the monitors, they'll jump right in and say, "Hey, Lisbon School, we'll take care of that," and they'll contact Public Works quicker than I can. The road conditions have been great, and they do monitor us, but to the extent that we always monitor ourselves. Like Tracy just said, we have hubs in every school. I've always have a radio on my hip. So we've been fortunate to have. I reached out to other transportation directors throughout the state also, and again, just as Tracy just stated, we were very fortunate. Some of them did say that some of the officers were able to attest to this. They were able to monitor our frequencies. Some of the police, they were able to put our bus frequency in the cruises, so some of the PD can monitor it, just to have that for so that was they'll be able to pick up our frequencies. There are some districts that do that. Also, there was I met yesterday. I went up and met with the sheriff's department, and I have a question. I had a concern of we have a DNR, a student that do not resuscitate, and we transport. And our concern is, if there's an incident, our policy, we're pulling over, we're calling the comm center, and they're going to send. So that was my concern. My biggest concern is, where do we go from this? Are we going to be able to? And I was assured you're not going to be able to monitor our systems now.
I don't believe it. Sure. Well, we're not going to install another frequency.
Understood.
It's not the business we're in. However, if you had the capabilities and agreements in place where you could switch over to your fire channel, it would obviously talk to us directly. If the fire department or the EMS department or the police department would let you do that, we're going to get a dispatcher right off the bat.
In the past, we've had a lot of, believe it or not, wrecker services use frequencies, whether fire or whatever, to communicate some of the same things. It works, it is in case of emergency, but to have a school frequency monitoring, probably not.
We understood, yeah.
Yep, and that's understandable.
Yeah.
We just as a school department, just wanted to let you all have the facts on what happens currently with our system, and whatever you choose to do. Obviously, we will have to just change protocols, put pieces of the puzzle in place, and just look at that differently. And we would need a little bit of lead time to figure that stuff out.
Can I ask you said you carry a radio?
Yes.
And that goes directly to the comm center here?
I can call them directly from my, yes.
So is there ever a time that you have your radio and you need it outside of business hours?
When I do have trips out?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you have like your DNR student?
He's always during school hours.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a key point, Mr. Crawford, in that regard. Part of the 2012 discussion led to a Homeland Security grant that actually got the portable radios for the school department. to not only address during the day hours, but all trips on after hours for all of athletics and all the other clubs and associations through the school.
Yeah.
So it's
My point was
beyond him.
that
Right.
if we did do this and there was somebody here at the comm center during business hours, they'd still be able to contact
Correct.
and dispatch out. And would they have
Well,
a
it depends, because if you don't mind, I heard two different theories. One would be just administrative only and non-dispatch, and one possibly could be dispatch, so just the level.
That's what I was just going to clarify. If you had just the administrative person on during the week, would they have radios so they could talk to the officers on the road?
Well, again, that's something we'd have to decide. If
Right.
we just had a clerical worker working out of the dispatch center, no, I probably wouldn't have them getting on the radio, somebody without any training. The other option would be having somebody in there that could dispatch while they are using it.
And you can talk to the officers on the road
Yes,
again with your radio.
we can contact, we call a comm center and then they'll dispatch, yes.
And you can also contact Ryan directly, and there's all that dialogue going back and forth with radio conditions, road conditions, I meant to say. 'Cause
So
I
it
know
boils
that
down to, we've been fortunate, we understand that, and our other districts operating without it, absolutely. There are just emergency pieces that we would need to put into place to make sure that our students are serviced, our bus drivers are equipped to be able to have a protocol if an emergency does arise. And obviously that protocol would be worked out through the safety committee that is already in existence as to what that would look like.
That wouldn't result in the additional cost in your budget, it would just be a matter of reorganizing procedures and process, correct?
The only thing that I might, just off the thought process, without speaking to the parties involved, would be potentially to have an emergency cell phone that is able to go, because, yes, most people have cell phones. If I'm a bus driver myself, I would use my own personal cell phone, but there are still people in the world that do not own, and definitely don't have anything in the cloud, that would need to have that available to them if they were doing a bus trip out of town. That would be the only
Makes sense.
thing that the
Now,
thought.
then you run the exposure too, is the fact that you're asking somebody to use a personal phone for business use.
Right. So it might be just, a phone or two, depending on how many trips we have that are available when they go.
Right.
And it gets,
You get a track phone for, $50 and
Yeah.
$100 for a year for
so
service.
obviously, it's a minimal cost, but that's the one thing that
But-
jumps out.
Mind you, most cell phones, correct me if I'm wrong,
Go to,
you can, whether you have a service plan or not, you can still dial 911. Okay.
I think it's probably just more about, we can certainly drill down on what the best way to go about doing that, but I think the idea is just to get a better understanding of what we did anticipate. We know what your service is now. Thank you for enlightening us and realizing also that you guys have kind of been on the upper level of what the services that you've been getting, so it's appreciated that you understand that maybe this is, if we were to go down this road, if that happens, that may be something that you guys could be able to go ahead and say, well, we'll just find a different way.
right. Yeah, I think it's definitely a doable thing from a transportation standpoint, too.
Mr. Materia?
Yeah, just so you don't always get cells that
Right.
cell phone and we track.
Yeah.
So that idea may not work.
It may not work.
Would work.
And I don't know enough about the frequencies to know if we handed him Allen's radio to travel to Madison.
It's not gonna work.
So.
No.
So those types of things would have to be.
He does.
Apparently, the folks that travel through Madison with radios can tell you pretty clearly.
I'm sure there's a range on the radios too.
There is.
So, obviously those solutions would need to be figured out. My guess is on a bus of, basketball players, all of them have different service plans. One of them would be able to get out, but.
One of them's calling his parents anyways. You're gonna
Exactly.
read
It's
it.
already on Facebook and Twitter.
Any other questions of the school folks? Yes, Mr. LaRochelle?
Going back in the history of the radios and the buses were basically put there because of the cell phone. It was basically a security and a safety issue. So during the day, you don't require your bus drivers to have another means of communication. So, even if something was to happen in town, as we just seen in the news lately, it seems like buses are crashing everywhere. So during the day, if the bus driver isn't required to have a cell phone, how would they communicate? what the protocol would be if that wasn't in place. I mean, I do realize that, you know, Alan actually has a, you know, radio most of the time, but not.
Well, I do believe there's a couple parts in town that go out, don't they?
Yeah, we do have spots in town that do go out.
Yeah.
But also, we can't mandate our employees to have cell phones.
But if,
Unless you actually, as part of the.
Unless we provided it, correct. Right, as Tracy just stated, yeah.
as a clarification question to Mr. Larichelle, then, the fact that you're not advocating removing the phone, the radios, it's the fact that if we lose monitoring here, it would only be during the daytime when you could use it either at the schools or your personal use, correct?
Right, we can monitor, I mean, we've had somebody be able to monitor for us.
There's somebody
Not that
outside
we're
the
not
school
listening,
environment.
But now we would have to have somebody pay more attention to what all the calls are. I mean, most of the time it's, you know, LCS based to a bus driver, so-and-so isn't going to mom's house today, she's going to dad's, and that's bus, whatever, so can you please hold up and transfer the kids? So, you know, there's more calls like that, that go on than emergency calls.
Any other questions of the school folks? All right.
Thank you.
PW, water, who wants to go? Ryan, are you going to be representing sewer too?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. Quite honestly, it's the first real introduction to this discussion in this depth that I've had. I had 2.5 hours now to think about, listen to what everybody's had to say, and quite honestly, the comm center is more integrated into our operation than I really even gave them credit for it to begin with, especially this time of year. I don't know where the line is between the officers and the comm center for the most part, but PD in general, they're the ones that notify us. They're the ones that are keeping an eye on the conditions of the roads. They notify dispatch. Dispatch then calls our on-call, or calls the operations manager, who then comes in, makes the determination when to call the crew in, and that's how we handle a winter event for a traditional or a regular storm, if you will. Throughout the winter, invariably, the on-call public works person will be notified by the comm center if there's icy conditions or lose power, they have to put out stop signs, you know, whatever the emergency situation is. So they really are integrated into our operation at this point. Summertime, good weather, not necessarily as much, I would say, but they're still, they're the first point of contact that we generally have. And that's throughout the year as well as people that come into them first. I mean, they'll communicate directly with our staff, depending on what the nature of the call is. And it seems like they get, in some instances, more calls get funneled through PD and the comm center than would necessarily come in over even the town office line or the public works phone line. So they really are our means of knowing what's going on in the public more often than not. Sewer standpoint, it's pretty much a similar scenario. In addition to the direct call from the property owner if they have an issue, we also have 12 pump stations as part of our collection system. All of those have external monitoring or external lights and horns for the most part. So if there's a problem at a pump station, power failure, it's set up for cell phone communication to call our on-call sewer employee. But if that fails for one reason or another, there's the backup of that light and buzzer that generally it's, you know, the officer may notice it, or it's usually the neighbor that would call dispatch, and then they would, like I said, then turn around and route the call. So again, not knowing all the ins and outs and the options of, you know, anything other than what we're used to, that's basically the way we function, and seems to work very well from our standpoint. And I don't really, one thing I'm a little unclear of based on all the conversations is how much of the traffic that we're talking about is radio versus phones and whatnot. We do have radios. They're not used nearly as much as most of the other folks you've already heard from, and most of our communication does come from the phone. Throughout a storm,
when the guys are in the trucks, there's more radio communication, but we don't carry portables, and so all the communication happens via phone.
Sheriff?
Same idea, patrolman calls in, call my road commissioner or whoever.
So it's internally, it routes through from PD to you and then gets back locally, however you set it up?
Call the road commissioner, or whatever the title would be. We've got a sinkhole on County Road that just opened up, and patrolman stays till they get there. Call the road foreman, the roads are getting pretty slick out here. Call the, that's, what he's saying is the same practice.
So, what would a resident do if they called, could they call that same thing and get?
Yeah, it would be just like reporting an accident, or geez, I was just coming home and I was driving down Boneham Road and my car slid sideways. I'm okay, but you might want to get, okay, we'll send somebody out. Usually we don't send out, sometimes we'll send out a patrolman to check out the area, but in the end it ends up being the same, because usually the conditions across the county are pretty similar, other than your coastal where we got some northern, but once the meeting starts at 2 o'clock in the morning, it kind of rolls right through.
Let's walk through that pump station
Can I ask a
scenario,
clarifying question first on that? And again, based on, maybe I'm the dumbest person in the room right now, but the phone calls, the phone calls that they're gonna forward, are they 911, period? Strictly 911. I mean, the majority of the calls that we're talking about, is it a 911 call to the county, and that's where they're getting involved? So a typical call to 2500, and I've heard all kind of confusing points about that phone number at this point, but how much of the residential calls that we get through the comm center that are not 911 related, how would they be affected moving forward? Would be my biggest question, I guess.
Well, I know, and I don't know if we're talking the same, but currently right now Mechanic Falls has a non-emergency number. If they're not there, they don't answer the phone, and so many rings comes to us.
Okay.
So
But
2500 does not go silent. It can be routed to you.
Right, and from there, if you're calling because somebody just hit your mailbox and you call the 2500 number, well, it could be at noon, and if they're not answering it, it's gonna come to us, all right, we'll send an officer out. Not every call needs to come in 911, but it's easier nationwide to say, if you need police, fire it. So that would still continue. Non-emergency calls, however they're coming in now, would still happen. I know some towns, during certain weather, the patrolmen in those towns have to watch for water levels and alarm lights come on.
Right.
And they say, can you call whoever it is that is the contact? We would still do that. Does that answer the?
That's exactly where I was going with it. I was going back to your scenario to say, hey, I have a pump station outside of my house, 2 a.m., the red light's kicking off, the siren's going bananas. I'm going to call 2500, and so you answered that question nicely, Ryan, by saying, hey, what happens? So as long as the failover is, it'll ring 5 times or designated amount of times here, and then it fails over to county. That's what I want to understand with those non-emergency calls.
And we have that with I imagine Sabatis is the same way now too. I know Mechanic Falls, in the 90s I worked in Mechanic Falls PD, so that's been a long-standing.
Priority-wise, this is just me asking this question.
He just said that.
How is it prioritized? So you got somebody on does it have the same ranking when it hits your switch as a 911 call?
What do you mean as far as a 2500 number
Yeah,
coming in for you?
or any sort of non-emergency. Yeah.
They're all the same.
Queued the same?
If we have 5 phone numbers coming in, and one's Poland, one's Lisbon, and one's Mechanic Falls, sheriff's office, hi, I'd like to know, stand by, and we're gonna figure out which ones, because some people will call the non-emergency number, and it could in fact be somebody's in my house. So I think whether it would be through you or through us, it's the same idea.
So yeah, first in, first answered sort of scenario, and then they vet the call accordingly. If you get somebody that's not an emergency and you got calls in queue, you put them on hold, find out if you got a priority call behind
there
that.
was one time recently, somebody said, it might have been Harry talking about 911 calls. There's been times where you could get, recently there was like 3 911 calls at the same time. Sometimes they're all related to the same traffic accident on Route 26. Sometimes they're not, and sometimes they're all not really 911 calls. But it's the same idea, just like an officer getting complaints during the day, they're going to prioritize. It's the same thing with dispatch.
I haven't had the good fortune of coming to your center, and I'm going to correct that soon, I think, for a visit. But in the meantime, this is all on-screen information. Is that correct as well? So when these new numbers come in,
The 911 calls are all on screen.
okay, anything else that's not? Okay. Okay, thank you.
That answered your question, right? Anything of Ryan that we didn't cover already? Yes, Dot, I saw you.
Out of curiosity, what would happen if there was an emergency at the transfer station? The transfer station does not have an address per se, so if there was an emergency and they called 911, just curiosity.
We have that problem right now with what they call the barnyard in Livermore. It doesn't have an address, but we get calls for there, and sometimes it can appear on the map to be one end of Turner or one end of Livermore, and the majority of the complaints we're getting are from Greene across the river because they're hearing the echo. But the 911, it spots it, so you can figure it out, and then when you get there, you know it's the barnyard. Because some people don't know where they are, you know.
Well, it doesn't
I'm
have.
in a field, I broke my leg, you know, and it doesn't have an address because it's a field where they race mud trucks.
And if something happened at the transfer station, your dispatchers would tell our officers, and our officers would know where the transfer station is.
Yeah, and there's the thing about pinging off certain towers, where in the middle of the night sometimes I'm getting an abandoned 911 call, it's coming in here. So you know, you go check the area unless there's some towers that do that frequently. But you'll go check, any police officer will be advised, whether it's your PD or our deputies, and kind of go check out the area to make sure there's nothing, as best they can tell. But the transfer station would be the same thing. I would hope somebody would say I'm at the transfer station. So yeah, an area on whatever road your transfer station's on, and was, you know.
If it's a cell caller, the phones are, several years ago, if it's a cell caller, several years ago, all cell phones have GPS signal in them now, and basically the 911 mapping system will map you right down to a couple meters. So that's a huge benefit to everybody. The problem lies in if the GPS doesn't catch up fast enough for the caller to hang up, and then we have a larger area to search. So
Anything else for PW and sewer side? Shelley?
I think all of our concerns have been addressed. Calling in the number for any call-outs, sounds like it will be handled the same. The other request we had was if we could get a log sheet of any calls you get for the water department, when they're made, when you make the call, how long it takes you to contact us, anything like that.
yeah, we can, depending on
It's
how
all
this
part
all
of that.
comes, right?
So I think we're all set.
How about your water main breaks or any of that nature? It's similar to same issue as Ryan would be experiencing, or the road conditions, or emergency dispatch. It's a lot of the return theme.
We have a separate service with Seacoast Security. So any of our alarms go off, they contact our operators directly. The on-call person, we have an on-call schedule that we would have proposed to them, the same that we do for the police station now at Seacoast Security.
Any questions of water before? Thank you. Going through the checklist of parties, the only other one would be recreation. Anybody want to tackle that one? We've mentioned it with Parks and Recreation, now the consolidation. I don't want to simplify, but they have radio communications too, so it'd be similar to the same issues that PW and water and sewer would be experiencing. Is that a fair assessment? Okay. Any other topics? Yes, sir.
I had one as far as the fire monitor panel in this building is actually monitored by the dispatcher, so you would have to be paying for your monitoring service for this building.
I know the camera system in this building is also monitored from there. Can we look into what it would cost if we contracted that out to someone like Seacoast Security, what it would cost for having someone monitor that off-site?
I'm assuming Boiler come to you, Ryan? Does Boiler come to you, or is that just you're the jack of all trades and going to get the call?
If there's an issue, the dispatchers and supervisors for BD for this building have all the contact information for our various contractors that we utilize.
So the answer would be a no, but it would have to be addressed along the same lines as the others to be able to sort it out if it's not being administered by somebody in dispatch. Any of those facilities-wise that are on this one specifically that I'm missing? Yes?
I was just wondering, he mentioned the security system here, but now witness that was at Public Works. I believe that actually went on Public Works.
Yes, there are local computers cameras recording.
So they know that can't come to anybody.
No, unless there's an issue.
No, unless there's an issue.
Sheriff, I just want to kind of go back to one thing that I've been holding on to. We talked about it a little while back. I heard something about when we were transporting and also one of our officers transporting a prisoner to the county jail. I heard something about diverting resources to cover while we had that happen. Could you just give me, I guess, a garden variety overview of how that works? Because I know that.
Generally, like currently right now, we have Poland, and which is a contract town.
Yeah.
We have Mechanic Falls, which we dispatch for. If we hear the Mechanic Falls officer coming in, and let's say Poland isn't there, a law of averages, we better get somebody in that area because something's going to happen. Livermore Falls is 45 minutes away at a good speed from the SO. If the one Livermore Falls officer decides to bring a guy in for a minimal charge while we're discouraged, at times we've offered to transport them at a meet point, and at times we've just taken the brunt and covered their calls. We are a county organization. It's kind of what we're there for. We, Lewiston, Auburn, Lisbon, Sabattis all these towns have their own police departments, but they contribute to something for us. So we keep that in mind, whether I was just a patrolman on the street or even in this position. It's just easier to monitor when we're all in on the same connection group. When I was on the road Thursday nights, we didn't stray too far away from Auburn. And I know some Thursday nights things got so out of hand in Auburn, Lisbon would actually show up because they just needed that much manpower. So, with that in mind, you don't want to be too far out of the way if something's happening in Livermore Falls and they chose to bring somebody down on a charge. The advantage to actually bringing somebody into custody from a law enforcement end is there is requirements about the booking process, photos and fingerprints, and again, that's something the jail does for everybody coming through. So something to get you back on the street quicker and get the information for you is the booking process. By the time an officer goes to do their reports, they're already booked into the system, the information's already in. I don't know how your current tabs are set up through the IMC system, but I know a lot of the fields I got to just bypass because it was done in the facility.
Yeah, and so that's what I wanted to kind of drill down a little bit more. It sounds to me like there's a lot more prep to go ahead and alleviate some of the things that would slow an officer from getting back onto the street quicker. So I heard that. So the coverage piece, and the thing that I want to drill down a little bit more is if our officer's transporting, it's nice to hear that maybe there's a halfway point. That might make sense for a pickup.
Well, Lisbon's kind of close. Let's not get carried away.
Yeah, right. So that doesn't hurt, but it's good to hear that there's some workarounds in place and understanding that there may be different needs.
Well, and on the reverse, in talking to Sabattis, they really felt, because we did work with them a lot more, ironically, when we were dispatching. I don't know if it was a communication aspect, if it was the IMC, but they knew where their backup was when we were one. So now it's back to that. I don't work for Sabattis. I never have. So I don't know kind of so much what he was talking about, but I kind of got the gist. You're right. We kind of lost track of you when you weren't with us. So there is that issue where you're listening to everything that's going on. I used Auburn. That's probably a bad example. They had problems at Club Texas on Thursday night for a long period of time. Lewiston had what's that club on Park Street where we were always going there. So, you just knew certain times, depending on who the officer was working the detail at that bar, there's going to be a problem there tonight, and, get ready. But we do the same thing when we know the one guy working Sabattis, is bringing a guy in. I want to say from my experience working with all the police departments, I know a lot of counties statewide have an issue with departments arresting people on minimal charges. We don't see that so much here. Somebody that's I'll say second time OAS now, the way the law is written, operating after suspension, because the first time's kind of a freebie nowadays. we're not seeing those arrests come in. You know, shoplifting from Walmart, we'll say, they'll arrest, you know, they'll deal with 10 a night. Maybe one comes in. There's a reason for that. So what I'm saying is they're not bringing everybody that they could into the facility, which is good because we're trying to control our population there. So I would say with the frequency we do in Lisbon, they're probably operating the same way, not bringing everybody to the facility they can, or they're bailing them from here a lot more frequently than they're, you know, bailing them from. But yeah, those things happen, the slide over, the stay in the area. Just like when we divide with the state police our coverage after they're not 24 hours. So that changes how we're patrolling our county after they're not available, because we're going to pick up all the emergency calls right away. So we're kind of used to doing that.
Yes, sir.
Maybe this is a real easy answer, but it seems so that we actually, as a community, do a lot of mutual aid, both police and fire with Durham. So if, you know, Lisbon's always had, it seems so, if there's an accident on 125 Route 9 within, you know, 5 miles of the bridge, Lisbon's actually usually one of the first ones actually there. Who actually makes that call? Is that done through the sheriff's department? That actually makes that call, that actually says, hey, look, you know, the accident is within a few miles of the Durham-Lisbon bridge, so we can send out Lisbon at the same time? I mean, I was just curious how's that happened in the past? I mean, or
It would be the protocols? Yeah, I think it would be the protocols. And I know we had an issue recently, was it Wales, Monmouth, that whole arrangement that they had to change, or Savannah? There was somebody that had to adjust leads when they had, who got called for a backup first compared to, we had to change it recently?
Yeah, Wales was a little different. They didn't have a mutual aid agreement in place with Green from many years back, and now that things have changed, and we're all dispatching, we can do simultaneous dispatch at the same time for multiple fire departments, so it's easier that they all have the same mutual aid agreement.
And these are things, like when I was talking about through the workers group, or actually during initial, that we'd sit down and say, what works best for you? You know, and get those, you know, you want to have protocols in place that work. And ironically, they are different. Poland right now is doing ambulance service like Auburn does, and they're doing it from Mechanic Falls till 6 o'clock at night. You know, then after 6, it goes back to United. But they won't do it for people with obesity issues because they don't have the same equipment to transfer, and we're supposed to do, and we do it, but I'm just saying.
a lot of side notes.
There's some side notes to it all.
I just heard something about protocols, and maybe I just want to understand that a little bit better.
That's fire, and that's fire.
Right, and so if that's the case, I heard you say, forgive me, I don't know your name. Thanks. So, yeah, I heard you say we can dispatch to multiple agencies at the same time. Is that something that if a call comes in, I'll just dumb it down here, call comes in from Lisbon, then that the chief's going to be the one making the call whether or not they need mutual aid right out of the gate for you, and then you would then be able to go ahead and reach out immediately, or do you, is that what the protocols help me, Chief, if I'm
If they
simplifying
dispatch,
this?
the advantage of when we had Sabattis and Green and everybody here, if I did immediately mutual aid with them, they were at the push button of our dispatcher. If they're not, if we don't dispatch for them, a phone call needs to be made to whoever dispatches for them, and then them dispatch.
So it's one more layer of somebody that's got to get in the mix there to get a call to, and then, of course, get out to the folks, get them moving. Thank you. Thank you both.
We do mutual aid with Thompson. So Androscoggin County, if we go that way, is going to have to call SAC and have Thompson dispatch.
And when I say that, there's one more layer of call. I'm not trying to discourage. I'm just trying to understand process. That's all. I'll be clear on that.
So what's the process now then? If
Our dispatcher picks up the phone and calls SAC.
Okay.
No change.
No change.
We have Durham Fire in the room too. Would you like to speak, sir? To actually, you've heard a lot of dialogue here tonight. You bring your concerns.
We got to talk to him soon anyway, because we're going to hook up an antenna on his roof in a couple of weeks. Yeah.
Bill St. Michel, I'm the chief of Durham Fire and Rescue. We came to Lisbon back, I think you referred to it as it was a 2 when you took over or thereabouts. And when we came to Lisbon, the goals were to try to make that regional dispatch center, because I've always supported a regional dispatch center. It's in the best interest of public service. But we're here, and you guys had this conversation last year. I believe it was last year that you had this similar conversation. So we did research, and in our particular case, our intentions, we're happy with the service with the town of Lisbon. Harry's always been real receptive of issues. We've always managed to talk to it. Mostly we've never banged heads. He's got that kind of personality in the first place. But it worked. It worked well. But what we did, when we did our research, we contacted Brunswick, and we contacted LA 911, and we also contacted the Sheriff's Department. And our real costs, most of the costs for the dispatch service, the Sheriff's Department, was right in there. LA 911 was a little bit more. We never got a dispatching cost back from Brunswick. But our costs were in the move. So our intentions, if you stay here, would more than likely, I can't speak for the board until they review it and say, but I think my recommendation would be to continue to stay with Lisbon. Obviously, if Lisbon chooses to move, then we're going to exercise one of those options. And
you should keep
which
your
one
dollars
it's
in
be.
the county, I would say. One way or another, you're paying, you know?
Yeah. Which one of those options we choose to exercise, we'll cross that bridge at a time. It really shouldn't influence your decision, but I guess, personal level, I kind of hope that you guys choose to keep it here. Nothing against the Sheriff's Department.
Oh, I'm not insulting at all.
As not having a dispatch center, I can speak from the past history. I mean, back when I started, we had red lines, and then we went to Freeport for dispatching, the Sheriff's Department for dispatching, Lisbon for dispatching. And it looks like one more time before I retire, we might be moving again. Most of our radio equipment, dispatch equipment, should have had wheels on it.
And I'm a fan, like you said, of regional, the communication, and that's actually something we're trying to accomplish. But at the same time, like with dealing with Lisbon Rescue, I never even spoke to the chief here because you're a customer. I don't want to interfere or cause any animosity. And we talked about should we give him a heads up, and I said, it is what it is. They'll have a decision to make. You've been there with us before when it came up like a year ago. I kind of got the vibe of, when it's a rough ride, we're not just going to jump off. So I get that. And if you guys decide to do something, obviously he knows we've got the capabilities, and he can, give us a call away. But I didn't feel the need to call and say, hey, they're looking at doing this. Do you want us to include you? Because we kind of already know what it entails anyway. So.
And I know our current relationship with you, sir, is for fire and EMS dispatch. So that clarification with the sheriff tonight, that you got the benefit of that dialogue as well, too.
As far as interaction with the Sheriff's Department in the past, it was good. The service actually, when we moved to Lisbon, there was actually a question if the Sheriff's Department would even continue in the dispatch business. Because otherwise, in all fairness to the Sheriff's Department, I'm not sure that we would have moved it, but the intent was to try to develop that regional system, and it was going to be based here. Because dispatching, every time, as the sheriff's alluded to, every time you move dispatch, not only there's hidden costs, there's the cost of moving all of your historical data and information, but then there's setting up the system as well, and it usually takes 6 months to a year to iron out most of the details, not necessarily all of the details, but most of the details. And many people look at moving dispatch centers as cost savings, and to me that's the wrong reason to look at it as cost savings. It should be looked at as maintaining or improving services. And I do think regional centers actually are
And when we were here,
best interest of the citizens.
When we were here a year ago, it was kind of brought to my attention that we wouldn't even been here if the county would have had a better commitment before. And Lisbon decided to take the lead, I would say, in creating a regional center. But somewhere in that flux, half the people that said they were going to jump on with Lisbon stayed with the county, and then the county decided to stay open. So it created unnecessarily, at probably your cost, redundancy.
There was a plan at one point to move all the county operations here and operate out of the.
Something like that. Yeah, I wasn't here, wasn't involved with it, and I don't want to speak too much for what.
Exactly true, the whole county was gonna be.
Right, that was the whole plan that was
And they
proposed by
did. Livermore Falls stayed with
And
the county.
said, the
Yeah.
commissioner said, no, we reject that, we don't do it.
And at that point, that's when Mechanic Falls, Livermore Falls stayed. So this is why you actually have this. As last year when I was here, and I don't want to speak for anybody because that just doesn't, but it was said this wouldn't have been if what happened in those conversations
Was addressed correctly.
would have been just, if people would have been more upfront.
Right.
So, one thing we're trying to do is be upfront about it. It
Right.
made sense then to go to one regional. It makes sense now. I understand you're looking at dollars and cents. We talked about incorporating the records management, I think. The only thing I will add, and I get the local control, but we might be at a difference of opinion, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but when you want to talk public safety and public service, what you're doing now isn't the most efficient way to do it. I don't care who says what, how you cut it. You call 911 and it's direct service. It's one less part of that cog. So if you want to look at that, that's fine. That's all I'll say about it. You can make it with what you will. My professional opinion, what's been demonstrated to me from fire, from rescue, from my time sitting here, and from my experience working on the road, if you think about just the practical nature of how these things are done, if you want to talk cost perspective, you've got the numbers up front of you. I don't know what you're looking at. I was asked to come, but I can't state from a public safety perspective, calling 911 and getting that and the dispatch right there, and with the numbers that we're employing, they're there regardless. We're paying for it regardless. But that's all up for you to decide, and
You're
I won't be
eliminating the
calling,
middleman.
harassing, or bothering any of you. And I, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you in this type of format rather than getting blindsided like I did last year. And I realize, from an employee perspective or even from a user perspective, this is probably very uncomfortable. And, we've seen it in different things when they were trying to take the jails away. Nobody appreciates it. But unfortunately, you're elected to have to deal with budgetary issues or maybe service delivery issues like this. And good luck. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. And I enjoyed the conversation with all of you. If you're all set with me, I'm going to leave because.
No. Anybody else got anything before the sheriff does leave? That's Tracy.
I just have, if we don't take anything out of tonight, we need to work better on when to call 2500 and when not to.
Yes.
Is what I heard sitting here tonight, for services.
Mhm. We shouldn't be
Go ahead.
saying,
Thank
call
you, Sheriff.
353
Much appreciated.
2500
Thank you,
if
Sheriff.
it's
I'm sorry, I'm just.
No, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Keep going.
we shouldn't be calling the 353 2500 if it's an emergency. It should be strictly a non-emergency line, and I think the message has been portrayed in the past that no matter what it is, you call that number, and that is not. We teach our children in
Especially for
school.
medical stuff,
Right.
especially.
You pick up the phone and you call 911. So why are we portraying to the right? And I've heard many people say, "Well, that's the number I've always called. That shouldn't be the number you call."
Feels like that's a faster number to, avoid the 911 bounce and, get directly to them.
I heard mentioned tonight that it's not about dollar and cents, and if that's truly the case, then to be honest, I don't even know why we're going down this road. From the people I've heard speak tonight, seem to be in favor of our cop center. Our cop center has done a good job over the years past. I've used it before, and it's been top notch. I heard a rating of 7, but when they got to my call, I would rate them at least a 9 or 10. And if it's about safety, I think what we have here is already a good thing. So if it's not about dollar and cents, and maybe there's other people that don't like it, but I haven't heard anything negative said about our comp center tonight. I've heard other people outside the county, other people that have used it said it's a good comp center, and speak highly of it. So there may be a handful of people that don't want it, maybe they just want to get rid of it, try to save some money, but like he said, if it's not about dollar and cents, I don't understand why we've gone down this road. We did it last year, we went through this whole thing, and there was a overwhelming crowd that came out saying we don't want to get rid of our comp center. They want the service we have there, so that's my take on it.
Thank you, sir.
For me, it's not a dollar and cents. It's a public safety issue. You're eliminating the middleman. Right now, if you call 911, you're calling the dispatch, who's then calling us, who's then dispatching out. You're eliminating that.
We had to call 911. My wife called, and the service was extremely fast.
I don't think anybody's knocking their service
Right.
here. Nobody. We all think they do a great job.
Anything else from the public that we haven't? Yes, sir.
But sitting here as a citizen, and it really doesn't make a lot of difference to me one way or the other. They're both professional. County's professional, dispatch is professional. Mr. Robertal hit on it tonight. I think the best thing that he said was when he said, if we go to county and there's a savings of such a number of dollars, we can probably put 2 officers on to be there at crucial times. To me, as a citizen, that was the most important thing that was said tonight, was that putting 2 cops on duty at times that they should be there was more advantageous to the citizens of this community than who answers our phone call when we're down 911. Because the average person isn't going to give a rat who they're talking to when they call 911 as long as the dispatch is made. And using the funds for 2 police officers at crucial times, I think, is a lot better money spent than putting it into who is going to dispatch, if you can say that.
Now, the police study did say that something about the 2 officers. So to me, I mean, that's why we pay to have a study done. And if that is, like Mr. Robertile had said, and Mr. Cody, that would make the most logical sense to me. If we were to consolidate this, we can take that savings and we can put the 2 officers that we're understaffed with back on the road.
I'm going to play devil's advocate because it's the one thing that's been stuck in the back of my head the whole night, and that is, I'm hearing some great things. I think we had a lot of questions answered from the sheriff's department, but if he goes away tomorrow and whoever comes into his place doesn't share the same philosophies and principles, as much as I appreciate what the sheriff's done to try to build a system there that's going to be basically plug and play, so whoever the next sheriff would come in would look at it and say, it ain't broke, I'm not going to try to fix it. There's always somebody with some sort of ideology who could be influenced by those county commissioners. We could be back in the same boat. And I only say that so that we're looking at, because I think we all have a pretty good, I know I have a pretty good feeling about, I got a lot of questions answered tonight. Doesn't mean I made a decision, but at least it helps to clear things up a little bit. But I don't think we've talked about the other side of it. I think we're all thinking about it, which is what happens if we get in there and then what happens when the honeymoon's over and they come at us with a contract and we've already sold off. We don't have it anymore. We're in all of our eggs are in their basket now. And we have to accept what their pricing point is or move on to somewhere else. And there's always going to be a pain point and a lot of money associated with it. So just keep that in mind.
Nothing says that we have to go with Androscoggin County. You can go with another county. You can go with LA 911.
Agreed. I'm just saying, no matter where we go, no matter what we do, that's a back end.
On that subject, I believe it was discussed in 2012. We have 3 options. We can consider Brunswick, LA 911, or county. That's not an anywhere kind of dialogue.
I believe we could go further afield if we had to. I believe you can go to other counties or
you can go to
the state police.
Right, but it's depending. Right, but referencing the dialogue, assuming the was it the VCAP? What's the cap? Harry, help me here.
I'm sorry,
What's the cap again? That's when the consolidation by the state. We only have 3 options. CCAP? What the heck is the number? PSAP. PSAP. We only have 3 options that they were directing us that they would find it would be acceptable to be able to be moving within that dialogue. I had here, and then we're going to come back around. So, Mr. Pellets.
To say that it's not about money is really not truthful, because it's about money, but it's also about level of service, and we wouldn't be here if that wasn't a dilemma. So I think my opinion is that we have to do whatever we can get to keep the same level at the best buck. That's
correct.
Wherever that amounts.
Correct. Service.
The best level of service for the buck.
Harry?
Yeah, I'm thinking of Marty here and Vern. I mean, I became a citizen of this town in 1978. I also became an employee of the town in 1978. for the police department. So I've been here for a long time. We had a dispatch system when I got here. Yeah, we can talk about how that went, but we had teletypes the old teletype systems. You probably don't even know what I'm talking about, but you typed and it copied up in Augusta when we did a check on somebody's license or something. But the paper that we used in a roll had chunks of wood in it. I mean, it was like real old, almost like construction paper stuff. So I've been here through it all. I've been through town meetings. I've been through council meetings. I helped build and design our comm center. We were going to be the hub for the whole county when Desjardins was the sheriff. He said, we're done dispatching. We're not going to do it anymore. Everybody was like, oh, my God, what are we going to do? Lisbon stepped up. So, and Don is right. When you say it's not about the money, I think it is about the money. And if you look at the savings here, the way I figure it out, that's about $10 per capita. So if we want to lose what we've got, because once you lose it, that local control, you're not going to get it back. So if that's worth that, to me, it's not. But that's the way I look at it.
Mr. Cody.
Only thing I was gonna comment on is this, comment by Mr. Alvaro just made that we don't know who's gonna get in the office at county, and that can change a lot of things. Well, it also works that way with councils. And this keeps coming back year after year after year after year because it is about money. And it's not gonna change.
So it's also why I think, and I had brought this up at the last workshop when we did this, is the question of a referendum. If we're going to do it, maybe we should let the people decide what they have. That's right, they want the referendum. But is it a decision that should be made at this desk, or should that be made? To me, the people should make the decision whether they want.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And that's the way I think we left it when Roger Bickford.
Which is a waste of money.
You can't go to
Right.
referendum.
Well, you can, but it's not binding.
Right,
so
it's not, you can't bind another council.
But
But
the
it
point
gives us
being,
an idea of how the public
Right.
feels as a whole. Right,
It's
the
just-
public really feels strongly on it. I wouldn't want to oppose the public on that.
it's a pulse taker, and quite frankly, there's a lot of topics that have played out very specifically locally that it's about a 50-50 split. You're going to upset one side or the other. Yes, I see. We're here and then here. Sorry, Chief.
One thing to remember.
I'm going to put the cane down.
We, people of the town, want certain goods and services. And like it or not, if we're going to have these goods and services, we're going to have to tax ourselves to provide these goods and services. Granted, we want you, the council, who work for us, people, to do it as efficiently as possible. Get the biggest bang for the buck. But all in all, remember, the bottom line is if you want the goods and services, like the new gymnasium we all voted for, we needed it, we got it. It has to be paid for, and we have to tax ourselves to do it. And this goes with the dispatch center, one of the finest police departments in the state. If we want to keep it, we're going to have to pay for it one way or another.
Chief?
It may be a point, this is the second year in a row now that we've sat through the dispatch discussion at budget time of the year. Everybody knows that you'd be hard pressed to make this happen this budget year. Like I think Chief St. Michel said, it's 6 months to a year, making sure everything's working, everything's going. Because of the public safety side and the life safety side of this, it takes time to do this. So it would be, having these meetings and trying to figure out what we want to do now for this budget is probably a moot point. You're probably not going to be able to do this for this budget as you're looking at doing this.
That's a key point. So I thank you for bringing that up. It's been said a couple of different times coming up into this workshop about it being ahead of a budget cycle. Now, what I would actually say is this council has actually had a list of goals to be able to cover in the coming year, and it's outside of that discussion. We're not tied to a budget discussion. We want to just have the discussion associated with that list of goals. So in that regard, I am not going to commit to any timeline associated with that, because when you rush, it just makes for a bad decision all the way around.
I've heard people say fast track and things like that. There's no track when it comes to this. This is just quite simply something that we felt didn't get done the right way the last time around. which is bring all you folks in on the front end and have the conversation, not have you show up when you know there's going to be a vote on the back end and give, because I think I'd much rather partner with you than stand across the aisle from you as an adversary. And so I think that was the.
We tried 3 or 4 times, and the last, all the way back, even when it was at the county level, the users got together, and the users needed development, and then we turned it over to the county commissioners and everything else.
Yep.
And then the political game blew up.
2009, not the one?
Yeah. Correct. There was months put into that, and the users found out how they could do it.
Right.
Then it got to the political upper end of it, and it was just fall apart.
One small piece of this is the IMC licensing hosting fee, and that $4,000 that was an observation that was actually made by not hosting this and putting it back to council is a $4,000 savings to our community. You take that discussion and you open that dialogue to be able to consider what other considerations could potentially come out of it. So there are, even in short-term gains, potential savings on an operating budget.
There is no time restraint on this. Why not put it to a vote on the people in November? So we have between now and November to get out as much information, the pros and cons to doing that, and then let the people decide. I understand it's a non-binding vote, but it gives you guys an idea which way to
move, right?
I mean, and this is just me thinking out loud. Rather than pay for, I mean, we're gonna have a vote anyway in November. I get it. Well, rather than add that into that, what could we accomplish the same thing with public workshops?
Or what about a Survey Monkey?
I'm gonna go to my planning board person right here. The fact is, Survey Monkey or public forums, are they actually a worthwhile venture, or are they just the same crapshoot actually sitting here?
It can be, it depends on what you ask it.
Right.
If you gotta be very, the person that writes it has gotta be really,
Not guiding the results.
not just a silent.
Let's use the recent Route 9 piece. There was a couple of.
Yeah.
I'm only using it for the turnout,
and
that's it.
Yeah.
There was a pretty significant amount of
It
folks
was,
that turned
and
out.
as a matter of fact, the town bought a $200 copy of that thing, which we haven't used since, which should probably expiring pretty soon.
I think if you want the pulse of the community, you need to do it in a non-binding referendum at a November election. You're going to get way more people to vote than you are on any type of survey. You're never going to get enough for the survey.
Non-binding referendum is you ask one question.
Right.
Right,
Well,
right,
but it's
that's it.
but they're going to understand what the question is. I mean, they
Yeah.
pretty.
I would like to start with a survey and then go and see where that leads us.
I think in the past, just from what I've seen in the town, we backed up with information, is if you actually put a survey out there, and it's a fairly hot topic, you may get 300 to 500 people respond to that survey, and 300 to 500 people do not reflect 9,000 living.
Sure.
That's the key factor.
But can you control more than one person answering that? I mean, if like me, if I went in there 10 times and answered the same question, can you control that?
Right.
Within reason, your IP address can be recorded, so it's not going to be over and over. But sure, you could go to the public library, and then you can go to another location. If you really wanted to game it, I mean, if you got that kind of time, fantastic. I got to go to work every day.
Right.
Chief?
My only word of caution on the vote in the fall is by doing that, you're hanging it over the heads of my employees
Right.
in the fall. And what we will end up finding is
Morale.
we've got families, we got
Morale.
morale, we got paying attention, and they're going to look for
Other opportunities.
they're going to look for other opportunities, and if they leave, it is going to be very
Forcing the
difficult to hire other people to come to a job where
You don't know if it's going to be there.
You're forcing the hand when there's not an issue to force at this point.
That's a really great point, Chief. Thanks for bringing it up. 'Cause I guess that's
Very
for
then-
very short-sighted of us to just kind of talk this around, not putting the human cost to that as well.
Go.
Okay, I don't understand why this council cannot decide this issue. That's what the people put you there for, to make the hard decisions. Now, none of those people heard this discussion tonight. Okay, where everything came out, I thought everything was presented pretty well by everybody sitting in this room, by the sheriff, okay, and everybody. So right now, everybody in this room got the full knowledge of what's going on. That will never be transmitted to the other, 8,900 or 700, whatever. But the point is, you got that. Now, let's look at the flip side. If we wait for a referendum, those people that are out there ain't going to get the information you got. Okay? Second thing is who's going to read all that stuff. That was what? 3 hours? 3.5? So they're not going to read it. So you're not going to hold their attention. So now, we're going to do a referendum question that's non-binding, which means whatever. By the time we get to the bottom of that question, they're going to check whatever they can to get out of there. And we're going to have to go over this information again next year. And every year until the cows come home or whatever. You guys got all the information. And you were elected by the people to make tough decisions. Do it.
Hold on. I'm going to respond to that. If that were the case, we've discussed this 3 times prior to this tonight. This discussion would not even be happened because the prior 3 councils that were actually sitting in these chairs actually did vote on a decision to be able to do that. So this discussion would not have even happened following the logic.
That's not exactly true.
It's as close to your reality what you
No,
just projected,
because
though.
we didn't, in none of the other discussions, was the sheriff here, was the communications director here, and were all the information put out. We had a
Agreed.
dog and pony show, okay, that everybody attended that was so full of misinformation that it had no value at all. And so you guys just now got all the correct information. Pros and cons.
I understand associated with the 2015 in that regard, but I have read both the 2009 and 2012, and I stand by my opinion that that was pretty well vetted and at that point in time, if we went on technology, that comm center would still be here because we were the standard. The county was non-existent. They didn't have the hardware, and they had to get up to speed to be able to give the level of service that we were able to provide locally. And that became a political issue, whether it be at the county level, whether it be at the LA 911, but at the point in time, Lisbon needed to be able to do what was best for our citizens, which is why we're still entertaining this item dialogue tonight. Yes, Mr. Fellows. Absolutely, I am.
I listened to this whole thing tonight, and some of you may remember I ran for council. But when I did that, my main thought was that the council is elected to do for the town what the town wants to do because it is a representative form of government. If we wanted town meeting, we could have a referendum. But we don't have town meeting, we have a council form of government. We do need to put it to rest. We need to get all of the facts, which I think many more have come out here. And the interested citizens are sitting right here tonight.
Right.
They're not going to be at that referendum. They're just going to say, yeah, I want the vote, sure. Or, however the question's presented. So I think it's the council's job. We all like it or not, when you get done, that's the job.
I agree with you on that. And I know you're agreeing with what Mr. Fillmore is actually saying here. A point that I'm making is I'm not going to be in the position to actually critique prior councils or prior administration because the decision has been made 4 different times. I was not sitting in their shoes in their situation. I'm trying to actually vet the process with all players that are got a vested interest in it now. Mr. Cody.
The only thing that I could even bring up for a suggestion to help the decision made in this for this issue, when we did the comprehensive plan, we had a comprehensive steering committee and a group of business people and citizens from the community were put on that, and they were all able to hear all the information, all angles of it. Then the steering committee made the decision, and that's the way the comprehensive plan was written. And the steering committees for this issue, not picking partial people, but a good, true group, and let them hammer it out, and then the town go with that decision. Because you can't have the whole town hear all the information.
Which we just did tonight, so I counter whether it's actually would be productive in coming to this point, because it would be something that the council would ultimately have to decide on anyways. So we may have bypassed that piece to at least bring it to a discussion. Okay, but I get where you're coming from on that. Yes, sir?
Just to make a point, I mean, and I would feel this way regardless if we're talking about any option, whether it's maintenance of this building, any contracted services. I think you have a due right to the community that even before you consider this, I mean, we're looking at something that's actually well over $200,000. To me, that you can't do it justly without doing a competitive bid out there. We have more than one contractor out there that can do this. So the idea of just making a decision going to the county without actually doing with our obligations to the town, what's written in our charter and our ordinances, saying that we're going to do something like this, we have to go to the least competitive bid. To me, there's a lot more of this process than what we're seeing. I mean, there's nothing written that says that the council can actually, I don't believe, actually make this type of decision financially without going to the competitive bid. Maybe there is, but I don't think I've seen it when I was on council. The second part of that is, I don't think all the answers were answered tonight. I don't know, coming out of this, I mean, I don't know what we're going to have up front dispatch after hours. Is it someone sitting behind the desk that actually is just saying, okay, let me call somebody for you, or is it actually a dispatch? You know, as a small community, I like the idea if it's a nice Sunday morning and a good afternoon, I came in and get a burning permit. I realize that can be done online with a cost factor now. We can actually buy a subscription in line, and we can do that straight from the state level. But someone, there's just a lot of things that are small. We are big, but the small community aspect of it still plays a role. If someone actually, if I pick up a wallet down street, it's nice I come dispatch and hand it and feel pretty comfortable that that's to be taken care of in the correct way. Odds are, if I found a wallet, I'm not going to drive it off on the weekend to actually, more. But again, those are just simple things. Maybe they mean nothing at all, but the dollar and cents factor of it. I mean, if there's a lot of people on the council that critiqued other councils on how they did and how they made decisions based on their opinion, and I don't think the opinions of this group, unless you actually bent it the whole way with the idea of doing competitive bids, LA 911's in it for money. I mean, they are actually a private entity. And as you talk tonight, it's almost seamless now between county and LA 911, sharing information, sharing computers, sharing software. I believe within our lifespans, we will see one dispatch center up in that area. Because it's how unpractical it is for us to have a dispatch here in county, it's even more unpractical to have two huge dispatches within a few miles of one another that actually could be in one hub and actually serve the community as a whole. So I think eventually, don't get me wrong, I think eventually we will lose our dispatch, but I think we have a lot more options as time goes on versus what we do right now. That's my opinion.
To your point, Mr. Cheryl, I've actually also considered the bid process, and that's why I've mentioned the three parties, just for that reason. And that's why, again, I can list 12 reasons why I preferred not to have seen the sheet with the costs on it tonight, because it's a one-sided view, and I don't want to have it presuppose which direction we're talking in the dialogue. Yes?
There must be a reason this issue keeps coming up again and again and again and again. And tonight was very informative, pros and cons, a lot of issues were brought up, and perhaps it is time to put it to rest. To me, it makes sense, a faster response time going with 911, and the cost savings could result in more officers put on the road. I hadn't even considered that, but this issue keeps coming up year after year after year, and somebody needs to make a decision and put this to rest.
Anything else from the public? All right, we need to go around the table with the fact that, anything left?
I just want to thank everybody for coming out. It was, it's a good night, very informative, lots of good information, lots still more to, many questions got answered, some additional new ones popped up, so it's a good start.
Cassie?
I have nothing. I've said my piece.
Mr. Crawford?
Just to everybody that's in this room, if you're gonna go and, you know, inform your neighbors and your friends, try to keep it factual, because there's people maybe in this room that, you know, want things to go their way so much that they'll intentionally misinform people. So try to just keep it factual so everybody gets all the information. That's all I have to say.
Chief, you got nothing left, right? I know we've hit you pretty hard.
No, I think we've got all the facts from both sides out there tonight. I honestly do, and that's what I was hoping for, so
Right.
I'm happy with whatever.
And I appreciate the last two workshops actually putting you to the fire, hearing from our new resource in our direction for tackling a toxic subject of the past to be able to come to a productive outcome. So I appreciate that from you. Yes, Mark.
I suggest all of us on the council, before we get any further in making a decision, that we actually go either as a group or as individuals to see both the county operation and spend some time in our comm center and compare how they two operate and see if they're equivalent, or what's the difference there in actual operations on the ground.
Do your homework.
Right.
Actually, I'd like to see if we could, the next workshop, could we set something up with you to do that, both here and at, say, county or LA 911, or both? I don't care, just to actually continue the dialogue to see what options are. And I'd run that through you to set it up with whatever we can for our mutual schedules. Anything else, Mark?
That's it.
Mr. Graves.
Good stuff. More good stuff. I think that I like the security of keeping it local. That's one. There's a lot of good aspects on both sides, but I think most importantly that Larry makes a good point. It is up to us to decide where this goes. So that's all I have.
Chris?
More information than I even thought was going to come out. And it's not over. Again, people who are here, who are local, really want it to stay local. No doubt about it. As you said, this is dollars and cents. More than one service out there, and again, we've only been looking at one, really. Same guy came last time, same guy. Again, you need more information. It's very true that it's going to come down to the 7 of us sitting right here and where it really goes.
Right. And I know that was a comment made by me when we first handed these out, that I look at it as position neutral, because I've already eliminated final estimated savings because I would like to put the resources in to address the issues that is going to come out of the police operating budget, whether it be administrative wise or the night shift, so we don't have a loss of service. I think we've, from a variety of different perspectives, shared a lot of good information and a lot of similar views in that regard.
We're not going to save any money. It's going to be spent somewhere else.
As it should be.
We're all well aware of that.
As it should be.
Okay. When you talk about that service and in-house, and you've got to get 2 officers at night, and we're going to get 9 people who are going to get unemployed. It's still going to be a wash. So if you don't take the 2 people, you still have somebody at night with dispatch. So now it's really coming down to trying to make, again, the 2,500 number not a real response number, and the 911 so that it is faster.
And the 2,500 doesn't go away because it's still an administrative line that has to ring somewhere. Whether it rings here as administration or it's forwarded to county, it's still a number that's valid.
With the information that we received here, besides how many more dollars and cents we can save from LA or whoever else, again, I think it's still going to be a wash. So if you're not happy with what's going on right now, going somewhere else ain't going to change nothing. You're not going to save no dollars. You're going to have less people. You're going to have less people actually working. So I could make a decision right now. Okay.
Right.
That simple. So again, you think you need to continue on with this? You think you need to call somebody else or somebody else to?
You got what you.
$50 here, $100 there.
You got your answer now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's no.
don't have to wait for another meeting, I don't have to do another workshop, I don't have to talk to anybody else, I don't have to talk to LA 911 or any of them other people, because there is not gonna be enough savings. Again, it's not gonna,
All right, I'll entertain an informal straw poll. Do you guys, who's sitting at this table has enough to be able to make their decision tonight?
I do,
I do.
that's two of us.
I haven't heard anything associated with loss of service, but I mean, I don't want to push the issue. What I'm here in that regard, did I say three?
Yeah, you got three.
I got 3-4 in that regard associated with that, so we keep the dialogue moving forward to vet the process. You know, so I believe that's what's been our strength as individuals coming together to move on that task. So, everybody cool with that?
Can't hurt.
We done for the night? Anything else?
Close it out.
We are an hour past constructive.
I'm gonna let everybody clear out so they don't wipe them out. Go ahead, take your time. Can't go back otherwise.
So $9,000 is the savings?
No.
Gee, 11 grand. 11 grand.
That patient died before you get a
That's a dialogue. Put that question. I know it's a question for
Spend that dollar.